Hello everyone, welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. I know many of you are here to drift gently into sleep. Before you close your eyes, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. I wake up at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking. The same 3 sharp barks, followed by a moment of silence. Then 3 more. Always the same pattern, always the same urgency in the animal's voice. My alarm hasn't gone off yet. It's set for 7. But the dog's internal clock is apparently more reliable than my digital one. The morning light filters through my bedroom curtains with that particular golden quality that only exists at this exact time, creating familiar shadows across the hardwood floor. I can hear Mrs. Patterson in the apartment above rolling her desk chair across the floor. She does this every morning at precisely 6:52 a.m. A sound like distant thunder that reverberates through the building's thin walls. A pad to the kitchen. Ye my bare feet registering the cold transition from bedroom carpet to kitchen tile. The coffee maker has already started its cycle. I must have set it the night before, though I don't remember doing so. The rich aroma fills the small space, mixing with the faint smell of vanilla from the candle I burned yesterday evening. The newspaper lands on my doorstep with a soft thud at exactly 7:03 a.m. I know this without checking the clock, because it happens just as the coffee maker releases its final gurgle and click. The delivery person's footsteps echo in the hallway for exactly 12 seconds before fading into silence. This routine has become so familiar, so perfectly choreographed, that I could navigate it with my eyes closed. And lately, I've begun to feel like I am sleepwalking through it, moving through motions that feel both inevitable and strangely predetermined. The front page of the newspaper features a story about a local bakery winning an award for their sourdough bread. I read the article while sipping my coffee, noting how the baker describes the meditative process of kneading dough, the way repetition becomes a form of prayer. The words seem particularly resonant this morning, though I can't say why. At 7:34 a.m., I hear my upstairs neighbor turn on the shower. The old pipes in the building create a distinctive pattern of sounds. A sudden rush of water, followed by a rhythmic knocking that gradually fades to a steady hiss. I find myself counting the seconds until it stops. 147. It always stops at 147. I dress in my usual work clothes, navy slacks, white button-down shirt, the blue tie with the tiny geometric pattern. The clothes feel familiar against my skin, worn soft from repeated washing. As I knot the tie, I catch my reflection in the bedroom mirror and pause. Something about my face looks different today, though I can't identify what. Perhaps it's just the lighting. The walk to the office follows the same route I've taken for 3 years. 7 blocks north, 2 blocks east. Past the coffee shop with the chipped green awning. Past the bookstore with the dusty windows. past the small park, where an old man feeds pigeons from the same bench every morning. He nods at me today, just as he always does, but his smile seems to linger a moment longer than usual. At work. I settle into my cubicle and begin the familiar rhythm of checking emails, updating spreadsheets, attending meetings that could have been emails. My colleague Jenny stops by to ask about the Morrison account, just as she does every morning at 9:23 a.m. But today, her question sounds different somehow. Not the words themselves, but the tone. The way her voice rises at the end, as if she's unsure of something. The day progresses with its usual cadence. Lunch at 12:30. A turkey sandwich from the deli downstairs. Eaten at my desk, while scrolling through news articles that seem increasingly familiar. Afternoon meetings that blend together in a haze of PowerPoint slides and corporate jargon. The gradual dimming of light through the office windows as evening approaches. It's not until I'm walking home, retracing the same 7 blocks north and 2 blocks east, that I notice something odd. The old man who feeds the pigeons is still there, on the same bench, with the same bag of breadcrumbs. But it's nearly 6 p.m. now. Surely he should have gone home hours ago. He looks up as I pass, and his smile is exactly the same as it was this morning. Warm, knowing, slightly sad. The pigeons around his feet seem to be the same ones too, clustered in the same formation, pecking at crumbs with the same mechanical intensity. Back in my apartment, I follow the evening routine. Dinner prepared from ingredients I don't remember buying. Television programs that feel simultaneously new and completely familiar. The vanilla candle lit automatically, as if by muscle memory. The coffee maker set for tomorrow morning, though I don't recall making the decision to do so. I fall asleep to the sound of Mrs. Patterson's chair rolling across the floor above. A sound that seems to echo long after it should have stopped. And then I wake up at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking. The same 3 sharp barks, followed by silence. Then 3 more. The same golden light through the curtains, creating the same shadows. The same cold transition from carpet to tile. The same coffee maker gurgling to life, though I'm increasingly certain I didn't set it the night before. The newspaper lands with the same soft thud, but today I notice something different. The front page story is the same. The bakery winning an award for sourdough bread. But there's a small photograph I don't remember seeing before. It shows the baker kneading dough, but in the background, barely visible, is a customer sitting at one of the cafe tables. The customer looks remarkably like me. I study the photograph more closely, but the image is grainy, indistinct. It could be anyone, really. Still, something about the posture, the angle of the shoulders, seems familiar in a way that makes my coffee taste slightly bitter. The day unfolds exactly as before. Mrs. Patterson's chair at 6:52, the shower at 7,034's 147 seconds, the walk to work past the same landmarks. But now I'm paying attention to details I hadn't noticed before. The way Jenny hesitates before asking about the Morrison account. The way her eyes seemed to search my face for something. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The old man in the park nods again. But today I see that his bag of breadcrumbs is exactly as full as it was yesterday. The pigeons cluster in the same formation. But now I notice they never seem to actually eat the crumbs he scatters. They peck at the ground, but the bread remains untouched. That evening, I try something different. Instead of my usual route home, I take a detour through the residential streets behind my office. But somehow, I find myself on the familiar path anyway, walking past the coffee shop, the bookstore, the park. The old man is still there, still smiling, still scattering crumbs that the pigeons never consume. The third day begins exactly like the others, but now the repetition feels deliberate, orchestrated. I find myself moving through the motions with increasing awareness of their artificiality. The coffee tastes the same, but I notice it never grows cold. The newspaper bears the same date, but when I try to find yesterday's edition, I discover I have no memory of throwing it away. Jenny's question about the Morrison account becomes a kind of test. I wait for it, counting down the minutes until 9:23 a.m., and when she approaches my cubicle, I answer before she can speak. She pauses, confusion flickering across her face, then asks the question anyway, as if compelled by some script she cannot deviate from. By the fourth day, I begin to notice the sounds more acutely. The neighbor's dog doesn't just bark. It barks in a pattern that seems almost musical. Mrs. Patterson's chair doesn't just roll. It moves in rhythm, like a metronome keeping time for some vast, unseen orchestra. The coffee maker's gurgle becomes a kind of percussion, and even my own footsteps on the kitchen tile seem to echo in perfect tempo. I start timing everything. The newspaper delivery 7:03 a.m. and 37 seconds. The shower upstairs begins at 7:34 and 12 seconds, ends at exactly 7:36 and 39 seconds. My walk to work, 23 minutes and 45 seconds, not a moment more or less. But with each repetition, small details begin to shift. The baker's photograph in the newspaper becomes clearer, and the customer in the background looks more and more like me. Jenny's question about the Morrison account gains an edge of desperation, as if she's trying to break through some invisible barrier. The old man's smile becomes more pointed, more knowing. On the seventh day, I decide to break the pattern. I don't set the coffee maker. I don't read the newspaper. I take a different route to work, forcing myself down unfamiliar streets. But the coffee is brewing when I enter the kitchen anyway. The newspaper is waiting by my door. And no matter which direction I turn, I find myself on the same 7 blocks north, 2 blocks east. Jenny approaches at 90:23 exactly, but this time, when she opens her mouth to ask about the Morrison account, a different voice comes out. It's my voice, asking her question in perfect mimicry. She doesn't seem to notice. She nods and walks away, satisfied with an answer I never gave. The realization comes slowly, like water seeping through a crack in a foundation. I'm not experiencing the same day repeatedly. I'm becoming the same day. Each repetition strips away another layer of choice, another degree of freedom, until I am nothing more than a collection of predetermined actions, a series of sounds and movements that exist to maintain the rhythm. On what might be the 10th day, or the 100th, I understand why the coffee never grows cold, why the newspaper never changes, why the pigeons never eat the crumbs. We are all part of the same loop, the same carefully calibrated sequence designed to create the illusion of time passing. The old man in the park isn't feeding birds. He's marking time. Mrs. Patterson isn't moving furniture. She's keeping the beat. Jenny isn't asking about the Morrison account. She's testing whether I still remember who I'm supposed to be. But the most disturbing realization comes when I look in the mirror. My reflection shows the same face, the same clothes, the same knot in the blue tie. But behind my eyes, I can see the accumulation of all these repeated days, layered like geological strata. Each loop adds another version of myself, another perspective on the same 24 hours. I am becoming multiple, fractal, a recursion that echoes through the apartment building, the office, the city. When I speak, I can hear the ghost of every previous conversation. When I walk, my footsteps harmonize with the memory of every previous journey, and still the dog barks at 6:47 a.m. Still the coffee maker begins its cycle. Still the newspaper lands with its soft thud, carrying the same story about bread and repetition and the meditative nature of patterns that repeat until they become indistinguishable from prayer. I no longer try to break free. Instead, I listen more carefully to the symphony I've become part of. The rhythm is complex, beautiful in its precision. Every sound, every movement, every breath contributes to a larger composition that stretches beyond my understanding. Sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, I think I can hear other voices singing along with the pattern. Other people caught in their own loops, their own recursive days, all of us harmonizing in a song that has no beginning and no end. The dog barks, the chair rolls, the coffee gurgles, the newspaper lands, and I smile because I finally understand. I am not trapped in this day. I am this day, and tomorrow I will be this day again. Story 2. I moved to the farmhouse in late September, when the corn was golden and ready for harvest, and the scarecrow stood in the center of the field like a sentinel keeping watch over the endless rows. From my bedroom window on the second floor, I could see it clearly. A traditional figure dressed in faded overalls and a checkered shirt, arms stretched wide on a wooden crossbeam, head tilted at an angle that suggested either sleep or deep contemplation. The real estate agent had mentioned the scarecrow in passing, along with the barn that needed repairs and the well that occasionally ran dry. The previous owner was quite attached to it. She'd said with the kind of smile that real estate agents use to gloss over details they'd rather not explain. He insisted it stay with the property. Part of the charm, you know. I didn't mind. In fact, there was some small for the outing, about the scarecrow's presence. The way it provided a focal point in the vast expanse of farmland that stretched beyond my property line. It gave the landscape a sense of purpose, of human intention imposed upon the natural world. The first night, I fell asleep to the sound of wind moving through the corn stalks. A whispered conversation between thousands of leaves that seemed to center on the scarecrow's position. In my dreams, I thought I could hear the faint creak of wood and rope, the gentle sway of fabric in the breeze. When I woke the next morning and looked out my bedroom window, the scarecrow appeared exactly as it had the day before. Same position, same angle of the head, same arms stretched wide in their permanent gesture of welcome or warning. I made my coffee, unpacked another box of books, and began the slow process of making the old farmhouse feel like home. It was 3 days later that I first noticed something different. I was sitting on the front porch with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over the cornfield, when something about the scarecrow's position seemed off. Not dramatically different, just a subtle shift in the angle of its body, as if it had turned slightly during the night. The head, which I remembered tilting toward the east, now faced more directly north toward my house. I studied it for several minutes, trying to convince myself that I was misremembering the original position. Scarecrows were designed to move in the wind, after all. The whole point was to create the illusion of a living presence that would frighten away birds. A certain amount of shifting and swaying was not just normal but necessary. But as I watched, the scarecrow remained perfectly still. No wind disturbed its clothes or caused the rope holding it to the crossbeam to sway. It stood with an unnatural stability, as if its feet were somehow anchored more firmly than seemed possible for a figure made of straw and old clothes. Over the following days, I found myself paying more attention to the scarecrow than I cared to admit. Each morning, I would check its position from my bedroom window, and each morning it seemed to have moved slightly closer to the house. Not by much, perhaps a few feet, maybe the length of one corn row, but the cumulative effect was undeniable. I told myself it was an optical illusion, a trick of perspective caused by the changing light and my own imagination. The farmhouse was isolated, surrounded by miles of empty fields and distant forests. It would be natural for my mind to create patterns and stories to fill the silence, to impose narrative on the random movements of an inanimate object. But the measurements I began taking told a different story. Using the fence posts as reference points, I calculated the scarecrow's distance from various landmarks around the property. Each morning brought a subtle but consistent change. The scarecrow was moving, not randomly with the wind, but in a deliberate progression toward my house. After a week of this, I decided to drive out to the field and examine the scarecrow up close. The dirt road that ran along the property line was rutted and overgrown, clearly unused for many months. As I walked through the corn rows, toward the scarecrow's position. The tall stalks closed around me, creating a maze of golden corridors that seemed to muffle all sound, except the whisper of my own footsteps through the dried leaves. When I reached the scarecrow, I was surprised by its size. From the house, it had appeared to be roughly human proportions, but standing next to it, I realized it was considerably larger, nearly 7 feet tall, with arms that stretched wider than seemed necessary for its function. The clothes were old but well maintained, the overalls patched in several places, with care that suggested someone had taken pride in the scarecrow's appearance. The face was what struck me most. Instead of the crude burlap sack I had expected, the head was carved wood, painted with features that were both simple and somehow expressive. The eyes were closed, but the mouth was slightly open, as if the scarecrow were in the middle of speaking, or perhaps singing. The overall effect was peaceful rather than frightening, more like a sleeping person than a guardian designed to chase away pests. I examined the base where the crossbeam met the supporting post. The construction was solid, professional. Not the kind of temporary installation a farmer might put up for a single season. The post was sunk deep into the earth and secured with concrete. This scarecrow had been built to last, to remain in place through multiple seasons and years of weather. But as I studied the ground around the base, I noticed something that made my throat tighten with unease. The earth showed clear signs of recent disturbance, as if the entire structure had been lifted and moved. There were drag marks in the soil leading back toward the east, and the corn plants nearby showed evidence of having been trampled and then carefully restored to their upright positions. I spent another hour examining the area, trying to find some rational explanation for what I was seeing. But the evidence was clear. The scarecrow had been physically moved from its original position, relocated closer to my house, and then carefully camouflaged to hide the signs of its movement. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea and a pair of binoculars, watching the scarecrow as the sun set behind me. In the golden hour light, its painted face seemed almost animate, the slightly open mouth creating the impression of breath, of words being spoken too quietly to hear. As darkness fell, I continued my vigil. The scarecrow became a silhouette against the star-filled sky, a dark shape that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was allowing my imagination to transform a simple farm tool into something sinister. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the scarecrow was watching me as intently as I was watching it. At some point during the night, I must have dozed in my chair because I woke to the sound of my teacup hitting the porch floor. The crash startled me fully awake, and my first instinct was to look toward the cornfield. The scarecrow was gone. I fumbled for my binoculars, scanning the field frantically, but the wooden figure was nowhere to be seen. The crossbeam where it had stood was bare, silhouetted against the sky like a skeletal tree. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out to the field, my heart pounding with each step. The corn rows that had seemed so peaceful during the day now felt like walls closing in around me, and every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. When I reached the scarecrow's former position, I found the crossbeam empty but intact, still firmly anchored in the ground. But the scarecrow itself was nowhere to be found. I spent the rest of the night searching, following the paths between the corn rows with my flashlight, calling out as if the scarecrow might respond to my voice. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. I was looking for a missing garden ornament, as if it were a lost pet. But the fear I felt was real enough, a growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted in the world around me. As dawn broke, I made one final circuit of the field and found the scarecrow in a location that made my blood run cold. It was standing at the edge of my backyard, just beyond the fence that marked the boundary between cultivated field and residential property. The distance from its original position was roughly a quarter mile, but more unsettling was its new orientation. The scarecrow now faced directly toward my house, its painted eyes seeming to stare straight through my kitchen window. The expression on the carved face appeared different in the morning light, more alert, more purposeful. The mouth that had seemed peaceful the day before now looked like it was shaped around. A word I couldn't quite hear. I approached slowly, as if the scarecrow might bolt if I moved too quickly. Up close, I could see details I had missed before. The wood of the face was weathered, but skillfully carved. With tool marks that suggested the work of someone who understood both woodworking and anatomy. The features weren't crude or exaggerated, but surprisingly realistic, almost portrait, like in their precision. And the eyes, which I had been certain were carved as closed, now appeared to be slightly open, painted pupils visible beneath carved lids that seemed heavy with sleep or some deeper state of awareness. I reached out to touch the face, to verify what I was seeing, but stopped when I heard a sound that seemed to come from the scarecrow itself. A soft exhalation, like the release of breath that has been held for a very long time. I stepped back, my hand still extended, and for a moment that felt like hours, the scarecrow and I regarded each other in the growing morning light. Then, with a movement so subtle I might have imagined it, the carved head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. That afternoon, I called the real estate agent. "The scarecrow," I said without preamble when she answered. "Tell me about the previous owner's attachment to it." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of papers shuffling and a conversation happening in the background of her office. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its professional brightness. "Mr. Hensley lived on that property for 43 years, she said. "His wife died about 10 years ago, and after that he became quite reclusive. The scarecrow was something he built in her memory, I believe. He used to talk to it, according to the neighbors. spent hours out in the field, just standing next to it. What happened to him? Another pause. He passed away in his sleep last winter. Natural causes, the coroner said. Old age. But when the county officials came to secure the property, they found something odd. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Mr. Hensley was in his bed, but he was wearing the scarecrow's clothes, the overalls and checkered shirt, and the scarecrow was wearing his pajamas. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What did that mean? Nobody knew what to make of it. The family thought it was just eccentricity. Grief makes people do strange things. But the neighbors mentioned that in the weeks before he died, several of them saw him out in the field at all hours, talking to the scarecrow like it was responding, like it was having a conversation. That evening, I positioned myself at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee and a notebook. Lou determined to document whatever was happening with scientific precision. If the scarecrow was moving, I would record the movements. If I was experiencing some kind of breakdown, at least I would have evidence of my declining mental state. The scarecrow stood motionless at the edge of my yard, facing the house. As the sun set and darkness settled over the field, I could see its silhouette clearly outlined against the star-filled sky. I noted the time, the weather conditions, the exact position relative to my fence posts. At 11:43 p.m., the scarecrow moved. It wasn't a dramatic motion, just a slight turn of the head, as if it were looking from my kitchen window to my bedroom window on the second floor. But the movement was unmistakable, clearly visible even in the darkness. I wrote down the time and the nature of the movement, my hand shaking slightly as I held the pen. Over the next hour, I documented 17 separate movements. Each was small, subtle, a shift in posture, a slight adjustment of the arms, a turn of the head. But together, they created the unmistakable impression of a living being growing more comfortable, more animated, as if waking from a long sleep. At 1:15 a.m., the scarecrow began to walk. The movement was slow, deliberate, like someone testing legs that haven't been used in a long time. It took a step toward the house, paused, then took another. Each footfall seemed to gain confidence, and by the time it reached my back porch, it was walking with the measured gait of someone who knew exactly where they were going. I sat frozen at my kitchen window, watching as the scarecrow climbed the 3 steps to my back porch with careful precision. When it reached the door, it stopped and turned to face the window where I sat. In the darkness, I could see the painted features of its face clearly, and I was certain now that the eyes were open, looking directly at me with an expression of patient expectation. It raised one hand, a movement that seemed both greeting and invitation, and knocked on my back door. 3 soft, measured taps that echoed through the quiet house like a heartbeat. I found myself standing, moving toward the door without consciously deciding to do so. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard the voice. Soft, weathered, unmistakably human despite coming from a throat made of wood and paint. "She's been waiting," the Scarecrow said, its voice carrying through the door with perfect clarity. "She's been waiting for someone who would understand, someone who could see past the boundaries between one kind of life and another." I opened the door. The Scarecrow stood on my porch, tall and still in the moonlight, but somehow more human than it had appeared from a distance. Up close, I could see the care that had gone into its construction. The precise stitching on the clothes, the careful painting of the facial features, the way the straw stuffing had been arranged to suggest muscle and bone beneath the fabric. "Mr. Hensley?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why. The carved mouth moved in what might have been a smile, in a way, but also something new, something that exists in the space between what was and what could be. The boundaries aren't as fixed as most people think. Love finds a way to persist, to take new forms when the old ones are no longer possible. I stepped aside, and the Scarecrow entered my house with the careful movements of someone navigating an unfamiliar space. It moved through my kitchen and into the living room, where it stopped in front of the large window that looked out over the cornfield. "She's out there," it said, gesturing toward the darkness beyond the glass. "She's been out there since the day I built her a form she could inhabit, a way she could stay connected to the place we both loved. But she's been lonely, confused about what she's become. She needs someone who can help her understand." As I watched, a second figure emerged from the corn rows, smaller than the first Scarecrow, dressed in a simple dress and apron that fluttered in the night breeze. This one moved with more hesitation, as if still learning how to coordinate the mechanics of its wooden body. But even from a distance, I could see the grace in its movements, the unmistakable presence of consciousness learning to express itself through an unfamiliar form. The Scarecrow beside me tapped gently on the window, and the figure in the field turned toward the sound. Even through the glass and across the distance, I could feel the intensity of recognition that passed between them. A connection that transcended the limitations of their constructed bodies. "We can't leave," the Scarecrow said. "This land, this place, it's part of what we are now. But we can't stay without someone who understands, someone who can see us as we really are rather than as the things we appear to be." I looked at the Scarecrow, then at the figure in the field, then back at the comfortable life I had been trying to build in this isolated farmhouse. The choice seemed to make itself. "I understand," I said, and as I spoke the words, I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that my life had been moving toward this moment since the day I first saw the Scarecrow in the field. "Then you'll stay?" the Scarecrow asked. "You'll help us tend this place, help us remember what it means to be human even when humanity takes forms that others might not recognize." I nodded and felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't experienced in years. Outside, the figure in the field had begun to move toward the house, and I could see now that her painted face, bore the same expression of hopeful recognition that I had seen on her companion. They weren't haunting this place. They were loving it, caring for it in the only way they could. And now I would help them, just as they would help me understand that home isn't always what we expect it to be, and that love finds ways to persist even when it requires us to see beyond the boundaries of what we think we know about life and death, about consciousness and connection. The scarecrows come inside now, in the evenings, and we sit together in the living room, sharing stories about the life they built together and the life we're building now. During the day, they return to the field, tending to the land in ways that go deeper than agriculture, maintaining a connection to the earth that I'm only beginning to understand. And sometimes, late at night, I hear them walking through the house, not as intruders, but as family, as beings who have found a way to remain present in a world that insists on measuring existence by heartbeats and breathing. They have taught me that love is more persistent than death, more creative than grief, and that sometimes the scarecrows we build to protect what we value become the vessels through which what we value most finds its way back to us. I no longer measure the distance between the scarecrows and the house. Instead, I measure the growing closeness between what I thought I knew about the world and what I'm learning to see as possible. The boundaries, it turns out, were never as fixed as I believed. And in the space where those boundaries dissolve, something beautiful and strange and utterly real continues to unfold. Story 3. The basement of Millfield High School has always been a place of forgotten things. Old textbooks stacked in corners, broken desks waiting for repairs that never come, the smell of must and industrial cleaning chemicals that settles into your clothes and follows you home. I work down here 3 nights a week as part of the after-hours maintenance crew, a job that pays just enough to cover my community college tuition and keeps me busy during the hours when sleep feels impossible. Most of the basement is storage, but there's a small break area near the boiler room where the day shift sometimes eats lunch. It has a few folding chairs, a card table that wobbles, and a vending machine that's been here longer than anyone can remember. The machine is ancient, one of those heavy metal units from the 1970s with analog selection buttons and a coin slot worn smooth by decades of quarters and dimes. According to the maintenance logs, the machine was supposed to be removed years ago when the contract with the vending company expired. But somehow it was forgotten, left behind like so much else in the basement's collection of institutional debris. It doesn't work, of course, hasn't worked in years, but no one has bothered to haul it away. Or at least, that's what I thought until 3 weeks ago. I was finishing my shift around 2 a.m., mopping the floors near the break area, when I heard something that made me pause. A mechanical whirring sound, followed by the unmistakable thunk of something dropping into the collection slot of the old vending machine. I approached it carefully, more curious than concerned. The machine's display was dark, had been dark for as long as I'd been working here. But the collection door at the bottom was slightly ajar, as if something had just been dispensed. Inside the slot, wrapped in clear plastic like any normal vending machine snack, was a human tooth. Not a child's baby tooth, white and small and somehow innocent, but an adult molar, yellowed with age and wear. The root still intact and stained with what looked suspiciously like blood. It sat in the plastic wrapper like a piece of candy, complete with a small price tag, Joe .75. I stared at it for a long time, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The logical explanations lined up neatly. Someone playing a prank, a maintenance worker with a sick sense of humor. Maybe something left over from the biology classes that used to be held down here. But the tooth looked fresh, still damp, and the plastic wrapper was sealed with the kind of precision that suggested industrial packaging. I left it in the slot and finished my shift, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. The next morning, I mentioned it to Carlos, the day shift supervisor, but when he checked the machine, the slot was empty. He laughed it off, made jokes about the basement being haunted by the ghosts of failed dental hygiene. But I knew what I'd seen. 2 nights later, I heard the sound again. The same mechanical whirring, the same decisive thunk. This time I was ready, approaching the machine immediately, before whatever was inside could disappear or be dismissed as imagination. The slot contained another wrapped item, a lock of hair, dark brown and lustrous, bound with a small rubber band. The hair was longer than mine, softer looking, and when I picked up the package, it felt warm through the plastic, as if it had just been cut from a living head. The price tag read 01.25. I took the package with me when I left that night, carrying it home in my jacket pocket like a shameful secret. Under the harsh fluorescent light of my kitchen, it looked even more real, even more impossible. The hair was beautiful, the kind of thick, healthy hair that appears in shampoo commercials. When I held it up to the light, I could see the way it caught and reflected the brightness, each strand perfect and individual. But whose hair was it? And how had it ended up sealed in a vending machine package in the basement of a high school at 2 a.m.? I started arriving at work earlier, staying later, finding excuses to pass by the break area throughout my shift. The machine remained silent and dark most of the time, but occasionally, always when I was alone, always in the deepest hours of the night, I would hear that mechanical sound, see the faint glow of internal lights that shouldn't exist, find another impossible item waiting in the collection slot. A fingernail, perfectly manicured with pale pink polish. Dore 50. A small piece of skin, soft and pink, with what looked like part of a tattoo visible on one edge. 2.2. An eyelash, long and curved, still carrying a trace of mascara. 0.205. Each item was individually wrapped, professionally packaged, priced as if it were a legitimate product. Each one was undeniably human, undeniably fresh, undeniably impossible. I began keeping them in a small box under my bed, lined with tissue paper like precious jewelry. I told myself I was collecting evidence, gathering proof of whatever strange phenomenon was occurring in the basement. But the truth was more complicated. There was something compelling about these fragments, something that spoke to a hunger I didn't fully understand. They were pieces of people, yes, but they were also beautiful in their own way. The tooth was smooth and ivory, white in places, shaped by years of use into something almost artistic. The hair caught light like spun silk, soft to the touch and carrying a faint scent of vanilla shampoo. The skin fragment was warm and alive, feeling, the tattoo portion showing part of what looked like a delicate flower design. After 2 weeks, I had collected 7 items. The machine seemed to be dispensing them randomly. Sometimes 3 nights would pass in silence. Sometimes I would hear the mechanism activate twice in a single shift. There was no pattern I could discern, no way to predict when the next gift would appear. But I was beginning to recognize something else. The items weren't random at all. They were connected, part of some larger whole that I was slowly piecing together. The hair was all the same color and texture, as if it came from the same person. The skin fragment had a mole near one edge that matched a similar mark I'd noticed on the fingernail. The eyelash, when I examined it under a magnifying glass, showed traces of the same pink polish that decorated the nail. Someone was being disassembled, piece by piece, and sold through an impossible vending machine in the basement of a high school. I should have reported it, should have called the police, should have demanded that the machine be removed immediately. But I was paralyzed by the impossibility of what I was experiencing, and if I'm being honest, by a growing fascination that bordered on addiction. Each new item was a small mystery, a fragment of a story I was desperate to complete. Who was this person? Where were these pieces coming from? And why was I the only one who seemed to be witnessing this gradual, commercial dismantling? 3 weeks into my collection, I found something that changed everything. The machine activated while I was refilling my mop bucket in the utility closet, the sound echoing through the empty basement with mechanical precision. When I reached the break area, the collection slot contained a small square of what looked like photograph paper, sealed in the usual clear plastic wrapper, but instead of body parts, this package contained an image. A Polaroid photograph of a young woman sitting in what appeared to be a school cafeteria. She had dark brown hair that caught the light beautifully, pale skin, with a small mole near her left ear, perfectly manicured nails painted in soft pink polish. Her eyes were dark and expressive, framed by long lashes that cast delicate shadows on her cheeks. She was smiling at the camera, but there was something in her expression. A tension around her eyes, a forced quality to her happiness, that suggested the photo had been taken against her will. The price tag on this item read 10-point hodr, significantly higher than any of the previous offerings. I recognized her immediately, of course. Not her name, not her specific identity, but her components. The hair, the skin, the nail, the eyelash. All the fragments I'd been collecting were pieces of this woman. This person who had been real and whole and beautiful. And now I was holding her photograph, purchased from a machine that had been selling me. Pieces of her body for weeks. The implications hit me like cold water. These weren't random medical waste or biology class specimens or elaborate pranks. These were parts of a person, a specific person, being distributed one fragment at a time through an impossible commercial transaction. But the woman in the photograph looked familiar in a way that went beyond the collected fragments. I stared at her face for long minutes, trying to place where I might have seen her before, until finally the memory crystallized with horrible clarity. Jenny Martinez, senior class of 2019. She disappeared during spring break of her final year, simply vanished without a trace while walking home from a friend's house. The police investigation had gone nowhere. The search parties had found nothing. And eventually the case had gone cold, like so many others. Her missing person posters had been taped to every surface in the school for months after her disappearance. Her smiling face looking out from bulletin boards and hallway walls until finally they were taken down and replaced with announcements for new clubs and upcoming events. I remembered her now. Quiet, artistic, the kind of student who moved through the hallways like a ghost. Visible but not quite present. She'd been in my English class junior year, had sometimes eaten lunch alone in the cafeteria, reading paperback novels and sketching in the margins of her notebooks. And now she was being sold to me, piece by piece, through a vending machine in the basement where she had once attended classes. My hands shook as I put the photograph back in its wrapper and added it to my collection. The box under my bed now felt less like a collection of curiosities and more like evidence of a crime. Pieces of a person who had been reduced to commercial inventory. But I couldn't bring myself to call the police. Couldn't figure out how to explain what I'd been experiencing. How do you report that a non-functional vending machine has been dispensing human remains? How do you describe the impossible without sounding insane? Instead, I began researching Jenny Martinez, trying to learn more about who she had been. What might have happened to her? The internet yielded sparse results. A few social media profiles that had gone dark after her disappearance. Some local news coverage of the search efforts, a memorial page maintained by her family. But there were also older references, school newspaper articles, and yearbook entries that painted a picture of a girl who had always been fascinated by the hidden spaces of the building, who had explored areas that most students never knew existed. She'd written articles about the school's history, had interviewed maintenance workers and longtime teachers about the changes the building had undergone over the decades. She'd known about the basement, had spent time down here, had probably discovered things that others had overlooked, including, perhaps, the true nature of the vending machine. The next night, I arrived at work with a pocket full of quarters, determined to test my growing theory. If the machine was somehow connected to Jenny's disappearance, if it was more than just a passive dispenser of impossible items, then maybe it would respond to deliberate interaction. I waited until 2 a.m., then approached the machine with the same careful attention I'd been giving it for weeks. The display remained dark, the selection buttons unresponsive. But when I inserted a quarter and pressed B3, the button that would have dispensed candy bars when the machine was functional, something remarkable happened. The internal lights flickered to life, illuminating rows of items I'd never seen before. Not candy or chips or soda, but an entire inventory of human fragments, each one wrapped in clear plastic and priced for sale. Hair of different colors, teeth of various sizes, pieces of skin bearing tattoos and scars and birthmarks. And in the center row, more expensive than the rest, were photographs. Dozens of them, showing faces I didn't recognize. Men and women of different ages, all with that same expression of forced happiness, that same tension around the eyes that suggested the pictures had been taken under duress. I selected another photograph at random, feeding the machine additional quarters until I had enough credit. The mechanism whirred, and a package dropped into the collection slot containing the image of a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair. He wore a teacher's ID badge that I couldn't quite read in the photograph, but his face had the patient, worn look of someone who'd spent decades working with teenagers. Mr. Peterson, 10th grade history. He'd retired 3 years ago, citing health problems, but I remembered him as one of the more popular teachers, someone who genuinely cared about his students and their success. He'd also disappeared, though not as dramatically as Jenny. He'd simply stopped coming to his retirement parties, stopped answering phone calls, stopped existing in any way that left traces. His absence had been noted but not investigated. Older people sometimes withdrew from social contact, sometimes moved away to be closer to family or to escape painful memories. But here was his photograph, priced at 15 ozera, sitting in a vending machine next to fragments of his physical being. I bought more photographs, feeding the machine every quarter I had, watching face after face drop into the collection slot. Some I recognized. Former students who had vanished during or shortly after graduation. Teachers who had retired and then disappeared. Maintenance workers who had simply stopped showing up for their shifts. All of them connected by their association with Millfield High School. All of them now reduced to commercial inventory in an impossible vending machine. But there were patterns within the patterns. Connections that suggested something even more disturbing than random disappearances. The missing people weren't chosen at random. They were all individuals who had spent significant time in the building after hours, who had explored its hidden spaces, who had discovered things they weren't supposed to know. Jenny Martinez with her articles about the school's history, Mr. Peterson, who had supervised detention and often worked late. Maria Santos, a night janitor whose photograph cost 12th Hoder. David Chen, a former student who had returned as a volunteer tutor and often stayed until the building was locked. All of them curious. All of them alone in the building at vulnerable times. All of them now feeding an inventory that seemed to grow larger each time I looked. The machine's lights flickered and dimmed, returning to their usual darkness. But now I could see faint outlines of movement behind the glass. Shadows that suggested the inventory was being restocked even as I watched. I gathered my photographs and fragments and left the basement, but I knew I would return. The machine had revealed itself to me for a reason, had chosen me as its customer, its witness, perhaps its next inventory item. The next morning, I didn't show up for my day classes. Instead, I sat in my apartment and laid out all the items I'd collected, arranging them like pieces of a puzzle I was finally beginning to understand. Jenny's hair, her skin, her tooth, her nail, her photograph, Mr. Peterson's image, Maria's picture, David's face staring up at me from glossy Polaroid paper. They were all there, all accounted for, all reduced to consumer goods with reasonable prices. But I was missing something. Some final piece that would complete the picture and explain how a vending machine could digest entire human beings and dispense them as individually wrapped products. That night, I returned to work carrying a crowbar and a flashlight, determined to examine the machine more closely, want to understand its mechanism, and perhaps find a way to reverse whatever process had claimed so many lives. But when I reached the break area, I found something waiting for me that stopped my investigation before it could begin. A new item in the collection slot, wrapped in the familiar clear plastic, priced at 0.25. A Polaroid photograph of myself, taken from behind as I bent over the machine the night before. My face visible in profile as I fed quarters into the slot. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, stood the shadows of other people. Jenny, Mr. Peterson, Maria, David, all the faces I'd been collecting, all watching as I interacted with the machine that had consumed them. And at the bottom of the photograph, written in neat block letters, was a price tag that made my blood freeze. Finfi USD Omar, Yo 1225. I dropped the photograph and backed away from the machine, but it was too late. The internal lights were already flickering to life, the mechanism already whirring to action, preparing to dispense whatever item had been selected. Behind the glass, I could see the inventory shifting and rearranging itself, making room for new additions. And in the reflection of the machine's surface, I could see my own face staring back, already looking like it belonged in a Polaroid photograph, already wearing the expression of forced happiness and hidden terror that marked all the machine's products. The collection slot opened with a soft mechanical sound, waiting patiently for whatever I was about to become. Somewhere in the basement's hidden spaces, I could hear footsteps, not the heavy boots of maintenance workers, but the soft shuffle of people who no longer needed to worry about making noise, who had already become inventory, who were waiting to welcome the machine's newest customer. The quarters in my pocket felt warm against my leg, and I realized I was already reaching for them, already preparing to feed the machine that had been feeding on the school's forgotten people for who knows how long. The mechanism hummed softly, almost like a lullaby, as if trying to soothe me into compliance. In the distance, I could hear the school's morning bell beginning to ring, calling students to another day of classes in the building above. But down here in the basement, where forgotten things came to rest and impossible machines turned people into products, time moved differently. The collection slot waited, patient and hungry, while I stood frozen between the desire to run and the growing certainty that running was no longer an option. After all, I had been such a good customer, and the machine always took care of its best customers. Story 4. The water whispers against my mask as I descend, each breath a measured rhythm through the regulator. 70 feet. 80. The surface world fades into a memory of light, leaving only the gentle pressure of the deep embracing my body like an old friend. I've been diving these waters for 15 years, know every coral formation, every rocky outcrop. The familiar weight of my tank, the steady hiss of air, the way my fins cut through the blue, black silence. It's all second nature now. My movements are automatic. Fluid, as if I belong down here, more than up there in the harsh brightness above. Today's dive is routine maintenance on the underwater research station at 90 feet. Check the sensors, replace the batteries, photograph the marine growth on the hull. Simple work that pays well enough to keep me in the water where I need to be, where the world makes sense in its muffled, dreamlike way. The thermocline hits at 80, 5 feet, and the water temperature drops noticeably. My wetsuit compensates, but I still feel that familiar kiss of cold against my exposed hands. It's then that I see it. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that makes my breathing pause for just a moment before training takes over, and I force myself to maintain the rhythm. A door. Not a hatch from a sunken ship, not part of the research station. A door. Wooden, with brass hinges that gleam impossibly bright in the filtered sunlight from above. It stands alone on the sandy bottom. No walls around it, no structure to support it. Just a door. As if someone had taken it from a house and placed it here with careful precision. I circle it slowly, my fins barely disturbing the sediment below. The wood appears to be oak, rich and dark, with that particular grain that speaks of age and craftsmanship. There are panels in the traditional style, and near the center, at exactly the right height, a brass handle worn smooth by countless hands. My depth gauge reads 90, 2 feet. I've been down for 18 minutes, plenty of air remaining. The rational part of my mind catalogues these facts, while another part, the part that's kept me alive in dangerous waters, whispers warnings I can't quite articulate. I photograph the door from multiple angles. The flash of my underwater camera, strobing against the wood. Through the viewfinder, it looks almost mundane, like any door you might find in an old house. But here, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the ocean floor, it feels as significant as a cathedral. The handle draws my attention again and again. It's the kind of detail that should be corroded, should be covered in marine growth after however long it's been down here. Instead, it gleams as if it were polished yesterday, as if someone has been maintaining it. I check my dive computer. 22 minutes down. I should be heading up soon, but the door holds me like gravity holds planets. I need to touch it, need to understand what I'm seeing. My hand reaches out, and the water resistance makes the movement dreamlike, suspended. The wood feels real under my neoprene gloves. Solid, dry somehow despite being 90 feet underwater. The grain runs beneath my fingertips, and I trace the familiar patterns that speak of trees and sunlight and things that exist in the world above. But it's when I touch the handle that my breathing stops entirely for a moment, despite years of training screaming at me never to hold my breath underwater. The handle is warm, not just warm, body temperature warm. The kind of warmth that speaks of recent human contact, of someone else's hand wrapped around the brass just moments before mine. Here, in water that can't be more than 5 degrees, surrounded by the cold embrace of the deep. The handle pulses with impossible heat. I jerk my hand back, and a stream of bubbles escapes my regulator as my breathing becomes ragged. The door stands unchanged, patient, waiting. But now I notice other details that my mind had somehow skipped before. The brass hinges show no sign of corrosion. The wood around the handle is worn smooth, as if by frequent use. My depth gauge still reads 2 feet. But something feels different about the water around me. The familiar pressure seems heavier, more insistent. The light filtering down from above appears dimmer, though my dive computer shows the same time, the same depth, the same air pressure. I swim around to the other side of the door, expecting to find what? Another handle, a lock. Instead, there's nothing but smooth wood and the vast emptiness of the ocean stretching away into darkness. The door has only one side, the side with the handle, as if the other side belongs to some other place entirely. 26 minutes down. I need to start my ascent soon. Need to follow the safety stops that keep nitrogen from bubbling in my bloodstream. But my hand drifts toward the handle again, drawn by a compulsion I don't understand. This time, when I touch it, the warmth spreads up my arm like a gentle current. Not unpleasant, not threatening, just impossibly warm in this cold place. And with the warmth comes something else. A sound that shouldn't exist underwater. A sound that my ears shouldn't be able to detect through the muffling pressure. Breathing. Not my breathing, with its mechanical rhythm through the regulator. Someone else's breathing, steady and deep and calm. The breathing of someone at rest, someone sleeping perhaps, someone dreaming peaceful dreams. I listen, and the breathing continues, just at the edge of my perception. When I focus on it directly, it fades. But when I let my attention drift to other things, the way the sand shifts in the current, the distant sound of my own heartbeat, the breathing returns. My depth gauge still reads 90, 2 feet. But now I notice that the needle isn't moving with the tiny fluctuations that should come with each breath, each small movement in the water. It holds perfectly steady, as if I'm suspended in something more solid than water, something that doesn't shift or flow. The handle grows warmer under my touch, and I realize I've been holding it for longer than I intended. How long? My dive computer should tell me, but the display seems unclear now, the numbers shifting slightly when I'm not looking directly at them. I try to let go of the handle, but my hand doesn't want to move. Not because I can't. I can feel my muscles respond when I tell them to, but because letting go feels wrong. Like walking away from something important, something that's been waiting for me specifically. The breathing grows more distinct, and with it comes another sound, fainter but unmistakable, footsteps. Soft, measured footsteps on what sounds like a wooden floor. Someone pacing back and forth, in a steady rhythm that matches the breathing. I close my eyes and listen, and the sounds become clearer. The footsteps aren't random. They follow a pattern. 7 steps in one direction, a pause, 7 steps back. 7 steps, pause, 7 steps back. Over and over, as if someone is walking the length of a small room, thinking, waiting. When I open my eyes, the door hasn't changed, but the water around it seems different. Less blue, more gray. As if the sunlight from above has been filtered through something other than water. The familiar sounds of the ocean, the distant groaning of the research station, the whisper of current against rock, have faded to almost nothing. My air gauge should be showing the steady consumption of a diver at depth. But the needle seems to move in small jerks, not the smooth decline I'm used to. Everything mechanical, everything that should be predictable and reliable, feels slightly off, slightly wrong. But the handle remains perfectly warm, perfectly real under my touch. I know I should let go. I know I should check my instruments, start my ascent, follow the procedures that have kept me alive through hundreds of dives. But the warmth is spreading now, not just up my arm, but through my whole body, chasing away the persistent cold that comes with deep water. It feels like coming home after a long journey, like sinking into a familiar chair by a fire. The breathing continues its steady rhythm, and the footsteps pace their measured pattern, and both sounds seem less strange now, less impossible. They seem natural, expected, as if they've always been there, and I'm only now learning to hear them. 7 steps. Pause. 7 steps back. I find myself counting along, anticipating the pause, waiting for the turn. My own breathing begins to match the rhythm I'm hearing, and the mechanical sound of my regulator fades into background noise. The door handle pulses with warmth now, a gentle heartbeat of heat that travels through my palm and up my arm. I wonder what would happen if I turned it. Wonder what's on the other side of a door that stands alone at the bottom of the ocean. My depth gauge reads 90, 2 feet, but depth feels meaningless now. I could be floating in space, suspended in the void between stars, and it would feel the same. The only real things are the warm handle under my palm, and the steady breathing in my ears, and the patient footsteps pacing their eternal pattern. 7 steps. Pause. 7 steps back. I realize I've been down here longer than I intended, much longer. But time feels elastic now, stretched and compressed like light bent by the weight of water. My air supply should be lower, but the gauge shows impossible numbers. Or maybe I'm reading it wrong. Or maybe it doesn't matter. The footsteps pause mid-pattern, and in the silence that follows, I hear something new. A voice, muffled but unmistakably human, speaking words I can't quite make out. It's coming from the other side of the door, the side that shouldn't exist, the side that opens onto something that isn't the ocean floor. I lean closer, the handle warming further under my grip, and try to make out the words. They're spoken softly, like someone talking to themselves, working through a problem or reciting something from memory. The voice is familiar somehow, like an echo of something I've heard before, but can't quite place. And then, clear as if spoken directly into my ear through the water, I hear my own name. Not shouted, not urgent, just spoken with quiet certainty. My name might be both. The voice of someone who's been waiting, who knew I would come, who has something to tell me. I lean against the door, my ear pressed to the wood, despite the impossibility of hearing anything through it underwater. But the voice continues, still speaking softly, still using my name, and now I can make out other words. Come home, it says. The water is fine here. The pressure is perfect. You don't have to hold your breath anymore. My regulator hisses with each breath, but the sound seems to come from very far away. The voice on the other side of the door grows clearer, more insistent. Turn the handle, it says. You've been swimming so long, swimming in circles, coming back to the same place. Turn the handle and stop swimming. The brass grows warmer still, hot enough now that I should pull my hand away, but the heat doesn't burn. It welcomes, invites, promises warmth that goes deeper than skin, deeper than bone. My depth gauge flickers between 90, 2 feet and numbers that make no sense. 3,000 feet, 30 feet. Negative numbers that shouldn't exist. But the door remains solid, real. The most substantial thing in a world that's becoming fluid and uncertain. The voice speaks my name again, and this time I recognize it fully. It's my own voice, but different. Calmer. Free of the constant low, level anxiety that comes with monitoring air supplies and nitrogen levels, and the dozen other things that can go wrong underwater. Turn the handle. My other voice says, You've been holding your breath for so long. I realize it's true. For years, decades maybe. I've been holding my breath, even with the regulator feeding me air. holding my breath against the possibility of equipment failure, against the weight of water above, against the fear that eventually the ocean will claim what it's always wanted. But here, with my hand on the warm handle, breathing doesn't feel like work anymore. The rhythm comes naturally, automatically, as if I'm finally remembering how it's supposed to feel. 7 steps. Pause. 7 steps back. The footsteps resume. And I understand now that they're waiting for me, pacing in patience while I make up my mind. The door stands ready, the handle warm with invitation, and on the other side, the voice that sounds like mine speaks softly of rest, of coming home, of water that doesn't press and threaten, but embraces and welcomes. I could turn the handle. I could step through and find out what's on the other side, what exists beyond the wood and brass and the impossible warmth. I could stop fighting the water and let it carry me where it wants me to go. My air gauge shows numbers that shift and blur, but my breathing remains steady, controlled, peaceful. The mechanical sound of the regulator fades, until it might be nothing more than the whisper of waves against a distant shore. The handle waits, warm and patient under my palm, and the voice on the other side speaks my name one more time, softly, like a lullaby, like a prayer, like the sound of coming home after the longest journey. I close my eyes and listen to the breathing, the footsteps, the voice that knows my name. 7 steps. Pause. 7 steps back. The rhythm of waiting, the pattern of patience, the eternal dance of invitation. The handle turns so easily, as if it's been waiting for my touch all along. Story 5. The tooth felt heavier than it should have when it finally came loose in Lily's small fingers. She had been wiggling it for weeks, working it back and forth with a patient dedication that only a 6-year-old can muster. Tongue constantly probing the increasingly mobile incisor until it finally surrendered with a tiny click and a brief bloom of metallic taste. I helped her rinse her mouth at the bathroom sink, watching the pale pink water swirl down the drain as she examined her treasure in the mirror. The tooth was perfect, small and white with a delicate root still attached, like a tiny pearl on a thin stem. Lily held it up to the light, marveling at its translucent quality, the way it seemed to glow from within. "It's so pretty, Daddy," she said, her speech slightly lispy now with the new gap in her smile. "Do you think the tooth fairy will like it?" I assured her that any tooth fairy would be delighted with such a perfect specimen. And together, we wrapped it carefully in a soft cloth napkin before placing it under her pillow. Lily arranged it with the precision of a ritual, smoothing the pillow, adjusting the blanket, making sure everything was exactly right for her nocturnal visitor. "Remember," she whispered conspiratorially, "I have to be really asleep for the tooth fairy to come. She's shy." I kissed her goodnight and dimmed the lights, listening to her breathing gradually slow and deepen as she drifted into sleep. The house settled around us with its familiar evening sounds. The grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant whisper of wind through the maple tree outside her window. Around midnight, I heard her stirring and padded quietly to her room to check on her. Sometimes she had nightmares, and I wanted to be nearby in case she needed comfort. But when I peered through her partially open door, I saw her sleeping peacefully, her small form barely visible under the quilted comforter my mother had made for her. The next morning brought Lily's excited shriek from her bedroom. I found her sitting up in bed, holding the cloth napkin in her hands with an expression of puzzled disappointment. The tooth was still there, exactly where she had placed it, but beside it lay a single coin. Not the shiny quarter I might have expected, but an old, tarnished penny that seemed almost black with age. And on the coin's surface, clearly visible in the morning light streaming through her window, was what looked like a small dark stain. "Daddy, the tooth fairy didn't take my tooth," Lily said, her voice trembling with confusion. "And this penny feels weird. It's cold, and it smells funny." I examined the coin carefully, trying to hide my own growing unease. The stain was definitely organic, rusty brown against the dark metal, and when I lifted the penny to my nose, I caught a faint metallic scent that reminded me uncomfortably of copper pipes and old blood. The coin itself was from 1943, making it older than both Lily and myself combined. Maybe the tooth fairy was in a hurry, I suggested, though the explanation felt hollow even as I spoke it. Sometimes fairies make mistakes just like people do. But Lily shook her head with the stubborn certainty of childhood. "No, Daddy, something's wrong. Real tooth fairies take the teeth. That's the whole point. This isn't a real tooth fairy." Her words sent an unexpected chill through me, though I couldn't say why. I slipped the stained penny in, planning to dispose of it later, and suggested we try again with the next tooth that came loose. Lily agreed readily enough, but I noticed she avoided touching the coin directly, using the corner of her napkin to move it around. 3 weeks later, another tooth began to loosen. One of her bottom incisors this time, smaller than the first, but just as perfectly formed. We went through the same ritual, wrapping it carefully, placing it under her pillow, ensuring everything was arranged just so for the supposed fairy's visit. This time, I decided to stay awake and keep watch. I positioned myself in the hallway outside her room with a book and a small reading light. Settling into the uncomfortable wooden chair I dragged from the kitchen, the grandfather clock marked the passing hours with its steady rhythm, and gradually the house grew quiet around me. Lily's breathing became deep and regular, the innocent sleep of childhood undisturbed by adult anxieties. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard the softest whisper of movement from her room. Not footsteps, exactly, but something like fabric brushing against fabric, or perhaps wings moving through still air. The sound was so faint, I might have missed it entirely if I hadn't been listening with the focused attention of a parent protecting their child. I set down my book and moved closer to her door, pressing my ear to the gap and holding my breath. The sound came again, a soft rustling, like papers being shuffled or leaves being disturbed by a gentle breeze. But there was no wind in the house, no papers in her room that could account for such a sound. I pushed the door, opened just a crack, and peered inside. Lily lay exactly as I had last seen her, curled on her side with her dark hair spread across the pillow. The room was filled with the soft blue glow of her nightlight, creating familiar shadows that had comforted her since she was a toddler. Everything appeared normal, peaceful, undisturbed. But the rustling continued. It seemed to come from the area around her pillow, of a sound like something small and delicate moving carefully through fabric. I watched for several minutes, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, searching for any sign of movement, any explanation for the subtle noise that seemed to dance just at the edge of perception. Then I saw it, a shadow that didn't quite belong, darker than the others and moving with purpose, rather than swaying with the gentle motion of her nightlight. It was small, no larger than my hand, and it seemed to hover just above her pillow, occasionally dipping down toward the hidden treasure beneath. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things, but the shadow remained. As I watched, it appeared to grow more solid, more defined, taking on a shape that might have been wings, or perhaps long, thin fingers reaching down to explore beneath Lily's pillow. The rustling grew slightly louder, and I heard something else, a sound like soft breathing, but wrong somehow, as if the rhythm was backward, or the intake and exhale were reversed. It made my skin crawl with instinctive revulsion, the way certain sounds can trigger an immediate flight response, even when we don't understand why. I reached for the light switch, my hand trembling slightly with a mixture of protective anger and unnamed fear. Whatever was in my daughter's room didn't belong there, and fairy or not, I intended to confront it directly. The overhead light blazed to life, flooding the room with harsh yellow illumination that banished all shadows instantly. Lily stirred slightly, but didn't wake, her breathing remaining deep and undisturbed. The room was empty except for her sleeping form. Nothing out of place, no sign of any intruder or visitor. But when I approached her pillow and carefully lifted it, I found the same arrangement as before. The tooth still wrapped in its cloth, untouched and pristine, but beside it another old coin. This one was a nickel from 1962, green with verdigris, and bearing the same rusty brown stain across its surface. And the stain was larger this time, more distinct. When I held the coin close to examine it, the metallic smell was stronger, more unpleasant, carrying undertones that reminded me of things I preferred not to identify. I pocketed this coin as well, and returned to my vigil in the hallway. But the remainder of the night passed in undisturbed silence. Whatever had visited Lily's room seemed satisfied with its transaction, at least for now. The pattern established itself over the following months as more teeth loosened and fell out. Each time, we would perform the ritual placement under her pillow. Each time, I would maintain my watch from the hallway. And each time, the mysterious visitor would arrive in the early morning hours, rustling softly around her pillow, before departing without taking what it had ostensibly come for. The coins accumulated in a small wooden box in my desk drawer. Pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters spanning decades, all bearing that same disturbing stain that seemed to grow more prominent with each exchange. The oldest was a penny from 1934, the newest a quarter from just 5 years ago. All of them carried that faint metallic odor that seemed to intensify when they were grouped together. I began researching the history of the tooth fairy myth, hoping to understand what we might be dealing with. The tradition, I learned, was relatively recent and varied widely between cultures. Some versions involved mice rather than fairies. Others spoke of spirits who collected children's teeth for magical purposes. But nowhere in my research did I find mention of teeth being left behind or coins being stained with mysterious substances. Lily grew increasingly troubled by our visitor's behavior. She had friends at school whose teeth had been properly collected by what seemed to be a more traditional fairy, leaving behind crisp bills or shiny new coins. The contrast between their experiences and hers became a source of anxiety that manifested in disturbed sleep and reluctance to lose more teeth. "What if it's not really a tooth fairy, Daddy?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. "What if it's something else pretending to be one?" Her words echoed my own growing suspicions, though I tried to maintain a reassuring facade. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" "Real tooth fairies want the teeth because they need them for fairy magic," she explained with the logic of childhood. "But this one doesn't take them. It just leaves dirty money and goes away. Maybe it's collecting something else instead." "Like what?" She was quiet for a long moment, a staring up at the ceiling with the serious expression she wore when wrestling with concepts too complex for her years. "Maybe it's not taking my teeth," she finally said. "Maybe it's leaving something behind. Something bad." That night, I decided to set up a camera. The small digital recorder I positioned on her dresser had night vision capability and motion activation, though I wondered if whatever was visiting would be captured by technology at all. Too many aspects of our situation seemed to exist in the spaces between normal and abnormal, visible and invisible, explicable and utterly mysterious. Lily lost another tooth the following week, a canine this time, pointed and slightly larger than her previous offerings. We wrapped it carefully and placed it under her pillow. But this time I also left a note, written in careful block letters that might pass for a child's handwriting. "Dear Tooth Fairy, please take my tooth this time. I have been very good." I hoped that communication might clarify our visitor's intentions, though I suspected we were dealing with something that operated by rule was very different from those governing normal fairy tale exchanges. The camera recorded for 8 hours that night, but when I reviewed the footage the next morning, Most of it showed only Lily's peaceful sleep and the gentle motion of her nightlight's glow. But at 2:17 a.m., the timestamp that had become sickeningly familiar, the image began to distort. The distortions started as a slight flickering around the edges of the frame, like interference from a nearby electrical device. But it quickly spread inward, creating areas of static and shadow that seemed to move independently of any light source. The audio picked up that same soft rustling I had heard during my manual vigils, but also something new. A sound like whispered counting, numbers spoken so quietly they were almost subliminal. As I watched, the darkness around Lily's pillow began to coalesce into something approaching a recognizable shape. Not quite human, but not entirely inhuman either. It had elongated limbs that moved with the fluid grace of something accustomed to navigating in darkness, and what might have been a face, though the features seemed to shift and blur whenever the camera tried to focus on them. The entity, for I could no longer pretend it was any kind of fairy, spent several minutes examining the tooth through the fabric of its wrapping. Its movements were delicate, almost reverent, as if it were evaluating the offering according to criteria I couldn't fathom. Then it placed another stained coin beside the wrapped tooth and began what appeared to be some kind of ritual. The whispered counting grew more distinct, and I realized it was speaking in reverse, starting from high numbers and working downward with meticulous precision. 27, 26, 25. Each number seemed to correspond with a gentle touch to Lily's forehead, so light that she never stirred, but deliberate enough that I could see the slight depression in her skin where contact was made. When the countdown reached 0, the entity paused and seemed to lean closer to her face. The camera's audio picked up what sounded like breathing, but not the normal rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. Instead, it was as if something was drawing in air through her sleeping mouth and nose, sampling her breath like a connoisseur evaluating wine. Then, with movements so subtle I might have missed them, if not for the camera's unblinking observation, the entity began to extract something from Lily. Not visibly, not physically, but something nonetheless. Thin wisps of what looked like silver smoke began to rise from her skin, primarily from the area around her mouth, where the lost teeth had once been. The smoke, if that's what it was, gathered around the entity's elongated fingers like cotton candy spinning onto a stick. It had substance and weight, pooling and flowing with liquid properties, while maintaining its ethereal, translucent appearance. As more of it collected, Lily seemed to grow paler, her peaceful sleep becoming somehow deeper, more profound, as if she were sinking into layers of unconsciousness far below normal rest. I understood then what was happening. The teeth were never the true prize. They were simply the entry point, the invitation that allowed this creature access to something far more precious, the essence of childhood itself, the luminous quality that made a 6-year-old sleep so perfect, so untouched by adult anxieties and sorrows. The stained coins weren't payment. They were markers, tokens left behind to indicate a transaction completed. And the stains weren't blood, as I had feared, but something else entirely. The residual traces of innocence being processed, concentrated, transformed into currency for purposes I couldn't begin to imagine. By the time the entity finished its harvest and faded back into the camera's distorted static, Lily looked subtly different. Still beautiful, still my daughter, but somehow dimmed. As if a light that had always burned brightly within her had been turned down to a lower setting. The next morning brought another old coin, a dime from 1957, heavily stained and reeking of that metallic odor that now made me feel physically ill. But more troubling was Lily's demeanor. She seemed tired in a way that sleep couldn't cure, and her usual morning excitement about the day ahead had been replaced by a listless acceptance that reminded me uncomfortably of how adults greet their daily obligations. Did the tooth fairy come again? She asked, but without her previous enthusiasm. The question carried the weight of resignation, as if she already knew the answer and had stopped caring about the unfairness of it all. I began researching methods of protection, diving into folklore and mythology with the desperation of a parent watching their child fade by degrees. Salt circles, iron objects, religious symbols. I tried them all, creating elaborate barriers around her bed and room. But nothing seemed to affect our nocturnal visitor, who continued its regular schedule with the persistence of something operating outside human understanding of deterrence. The coins accumulated, and with each new addition to my collection, Lily lost a little more of what made her uniquely herself. Her laughter became less frequent and more subdued. Her imaginative play grew structured and practical. Her questions about the world shifted from wondering and magical to logical and matter of fact. She was growing up too fast, but not in the natural way that parents often lament. This was different. A premature sophistication that seemed imposed from outside, rather than developing organically from within. The entity was stealing her childhood in measured doses, leaving behind the hollowed out shell of premature maturity. I began staying in her room all night, positioning myself in the chair beside her bed with the grim determination of a guard protecting. A treasure vault. The entity still came, still performed its ritual extraction, but my presence seemed to limit its access somehow. The silver smoke it collected grew thinner, less substantial, as if my watchful consciousness created interference in whatever connection it maintained with my sleeping daughter. But I couldn't stay awake forever. On the nights when exhaustion finally claimed me, when I would doze off despite my best intentions, I would wake to find Lily dimmed further. Another coin added to the collection. Another piece of her essential self consumed by our persistent visitor. I considered moving, taking Lily away from whatever had attached itself to our home. But research suggested that the entity's connection was to her rather than our location. The teeth had been an invitation. but one that created a bond transcending geography. Wherever we went, it would follow, continuing its gradual harvest until nothing remained of the bright, curious child she had been. The solution, when it finally occurred to me, was both simple and terrifying. If the entity wanted teeth as invitations, I would give it what it craved, but from someone whose childhood had already been consumed, whose innocence had been spent decades ago on the ordinary disappointments of adult life. Late one night, after Lily had lost what would prove to be her final tooth to our unwanted visitor, I made my way to the bathroom and examined my own reflection in the mirror. My adult teeth were strong and healthy, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the invitation they could provide, the access they could grant to someone who had nothing left to lose. The pain of extracting my own molar with pliers was nothing compared to watching my daughter fade by degrees. I wrapped the bloody tooth in the same soft cloth we had used for Lily's offerings and placed it under my own pillow, then lay back to wait for 20:17 a.m. When the entity came, it seemed confused by the change in routine. Its whispered counting was hesitant, uncertain, and when it began its examination of my offering, I felt its surprise like a cold wind across my skin. This wasn't what it had expected, wasn't part of the pattern it had established. But hunger won over confusion, and it began its ritual extraction anyway. The silver smoke that rose from my skin was different, darker, heavier, carrying the weight of accumulated disappointments and abandoned dreams. It tasted of compromise and resignation, of love constrained by responsibility and hope tempered by experience. Not the bright, pure essence of childhood, but the complex vintage of a life fully lived. The entity consumed it eagerly at first, then more slowly as the flavor registered. This wasn't the innocent sweetness it craved, but something altogether more challenging. The bitter medicine of adult reality, the knowledge that comes from understanding how little control we actually have over our circumstances. As it fed, I felt myself growing lighter, but not diminished. Instead, I felt the accumulated burdens of adulthood lifting away. The cynicism and weariness that had built up over decades being drawn off like poison from a wound. It was painful and liberating simultaneously, a purging that left me feeling hollowed out but clean. The entity continued its harvest until it had taken everything I had to offer, then retreated into shadow with what sounded like satisfaction. But within hours, that satisfaction curdled into something else entirely. Adult essence, I realized, carries with it not just experience, but judgment. The entity had consumed my knowledge of mortality, my understanding of consequences, my awareness that all actions have prices that must eventually be paid. It had ingested 7 years of accumulated wisdom, and that wisdom was now working within it like an infection. For the first time in what might have been centuries, the entity began to understand the full weight of what it had been doing. Not just taking from children, but stealing their very capacity for wonder, their ability to find magic in the mundane, their irreplaceable gift for seeing possibilities where adults see only limitations. The next morning brought silence. No coin under my pillow, no sign that anything had visited during the night. And Lily woke with something I hadn't seen in weeks. The bright spark of curiosity that had always been her defining characteristic. "Daddy, I had the most wonderful dream," she said, her voice carrying its old enthusiasm. I dreamed that all the sad things in the world got collected by someone who could carry them better. And all the children got to keep their happy dreams forever. I found the box of stained coins on my desk that morning, but they had changed. The rusty brown stains had faded to nothing, leaving behind clean, bright metal that caught the morning light with innocent brilliance. Not payment for stolen innocence, but purified by the adult wisdom that had finally taught their collector the true cost of its harvest. Lily's subsequent teeth fell out naturally and disappeared overnight, replaced by crisp dollar bills and shiny new quarters that spoke of a fairy tale operating exactly as it should. But sometimes, in the early morning hours around 117 a.m., I catch glimpses of something moving through the shadows of the house. Not hunting, but patrolling, protecting, carrying within its transformed essence the adult knowledge that some treasures are too precious to take. The entity still visits, but its purpose has changed. It has become what I suspect tooth fairies were always meant to be. Guardians of childhood rather than consumers of it. Protectors of innocence rather than predators upon it. And sometimes, when I listen carefully to the soft rustling that marks its passage, I think I can hear it whispering not numbers, but lullabies. Gentle songs that help children sleep safely through the night. The price of that transformation was everything I thought I knew about being an adult. But watching Lily flourish again, seeing her eyes bright with possibility and her imagination unfettered by premature sophistication, I know it was a bargain worth making. Some fairy tales, it turns out, can only be fixed from the inside. Story 6. The phone rings at 2:47 a.m., and I know before I answer that it's going to be one of those calls. The kind that splits your night in half, leaving the before and after as separate countries, with no bridge between them. My apartment is dark, except for the blue glow of my laptop screen, where I've been grading papers, trying to lose myself in the mundane rhythm of red ink and marginal comments. Almost don't answer. After 18 months, what could she possibly have to say that would change anything? But the ringing continues with mechanical persistence, and eventually my hand finds the phone, despite my better judgment. Hello. The silence stretches long enough that I wonder if it's a pocket dial, some cosmic accident that connected us across the void we've built between ourselves. Then I hear her voice, and it's exactly as I remember. That particular combination of confidence and uncertainty that always made me want to protect her from the world, even when she was the one inflicting damage. I'm sorry. Just those 2 words. spoken so quietly, I have to press the phone closer to my ear to be sure I heard correctly. Behind her voice, there's something else, a soft, rhythmic sound that my brain struggles to identify. Sarah. I sit up straighter in my chair, suddenly wide awake. Is that you? I'm sorry, she says again, and now I can hear that her voice is strange, distant somehow, as if she's speaking from the bottom of a well or through layers of thick glass. So sorry about everything. The sound behind her voice continues, steady and hypnotic. It takes me a moment to recognize it. Water dripping. Not the quick patter of rain or the rush of a faucet, but the slow, measured drop of water falling from a height into standing water. Each drop creates a small echo, suggesting a large space, a bathroom, maybe, or a basement. Where are you? I ask, because something about her voice and that persistent dripping raises alarm bells I can't quite articulate. Sarah, are you okay? I'm sorry I left, she continues, and it's as if she hasn't heard my questions, as if she's reading from a script written long before this conversation began. I'm sorry I took your grandmother's ring. I'm sorry I said those things about your writing, about your dreams. The dripping continues behind her words, each drop falling with metronomic precision. Drop, pause, drop, pause. The intervals are so regular they seem artificial, programmed, like a sound effect in a meditation app designed to induce calm. Sarah, you don't need to. I start, but she interrupts. I'm sorry I never told you about Marcus. I'm sorry about the lies, all of them, even the small ones. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough. Her voice carries that same distant quality, and I realize what it reminds me of. Those underwater scenes in movies, where characters speak and their voices are muffled. Dreamlike, separated from reality by layers of liquid pressure. I get up from my desk and walk to the window, phone pressed to my ear, as if changing my position might help me understand what I'm hearing. Outside, the city spreads in all directions, windows glowing like eyes in the darkness, each one hiding its own collection of 3 a.m. secrets. Sarah, where are you calling from? Are you? I pause, because the question I want to ask seems absurd, even as it forms in my mind. Are you underwater? The dripping continues, and her voice comes again, unchanged in tone or volume. I'm sorry I never learned to swim properly. I'm sorry about the bathtub. The bathtub. My skin goes cold, and I remember things I've tried to forget. The way she would fill the tub to the very brim and lie motionless in it for hours. The way I would find her there, eyes closed, perfectly still beneath the surface, only the occasional stream of bubbles proving she was still alive. When I asked her about it, she said the water helped her think, helped her feel weightless and clean. But that was 2 years ago, back when she was living in my apartment. Back when her drinking had gotten bad enough that her friends stopped calling and her sister stopped visiting. Back when she would disappear for days and return with no explanation beyond hollow apologies and promises she never intended to keep. Sarah, Listen to me, I say, gripping the phone tighter. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, just... I'm sorry about the accident, she says, cutting through my words with the same distant calm. I'm sorry about the bridge. I'm sorry about the water. The bridge. My hands start to shake, and I have to lean against the window frame to keep steady. 6 months ago, Sarah's car was found at the bottom of Miller's Creek, submerged beneath 8 feet of muddy water, after she'd driven through the guardrail on Route 19. The police said she'd been drinking, said the road was slick with rain, said these things happen more often than people realize. But they never found her body. The search went on for weeks. Divers explored every inch of the creek bed. Metal detectors swept the banks. Helicopters circled overhead with thermal cameras. The car was empty except for her purse, her shoes, and a bottle of vodka wedged between the seats. The driver's side door had been forced open, possibly by the impact, possibly by Sarah herself. The official conclusion was drowning, with the body carried downstream by spring currents. A memorial service was held. Her sister spoke about Sarah's kindness, her struggles, her creativity. I sat in the back row and listened to people describe someone I wasn't sure I'd ever really known. Sarah, I whisper into the phone. Sarah, that's not possible. I'm sorry I left you waiting, she continues, and the dripping grows louder, more insistent. Each drop seems to echo, not just through whatever space she's in, but through the phone line itself, as if the sound is traveling through water rather than through cellular towers and fiber optic cables. I close my eyes and listen more carefully to the background sounds. Beyond the dripping, there are other noises, subtle, almost inaudible, but definitely there. The creak of metal under pressure, the whisper of current moving around solid objects, and beneath it all, a sound I recognize from childhood summers at the lake, the hollow, muffled quality of sound transmitted through water. I'm sorry about the dreams, Sarah says. I know you've been having them. I know you see me in the water, calling for help. I'm sorry about that. I never meant to make you dream about drowning. She's right about the dreams. For months now, I've been jolted awake by visions of dark water, of hands reaching up from impossible depths, of Sarah's voice calling my name from somewhere I can't reach. I've told myself they're guilt dreams, the subconscious mind's way of processing survivor's syndrome and unresolved grief. But how does she know about them? The dreams will stop soon, she continues, her voice growing fainter, as if she's sinking deeper into whatever medium carries her words to me. I just needed to apologize first. I needed you to hear me say it. The dripping changes rhythm suddenly. Not faster or slower, but different somehow. Instead of single drops, I hear pairs now drop, drop, pause, drop, drop, pause, like a heartbeat, like the rhythm of someone breathing underwater, releasing small streams of bubbles with each exhalation. Sarah, please, I say, and my own voice sounds strange to me, desperate in a way that surprises me. Please tell me where you are. Let me help you. You can't help me now, she says, and for the first time. There's something like emotion in her voice. Not sadness, exactly, but a profound weariness, as if she's been carrying an enormous weight for a very long time. I'm too far down. The pressure is too much. I think about the physics of what she's describing, about the depth where water becomes crushing, where human lungs collapse and speech becomes impossible. But her voice continues, clear despite its distance, carrying impossible words across impossible distances. I'm sorry about your birthday last year, she says. I'm sorry I forgot to call. I'm sorry about Christmas, about your mother's funeral, about all the times I should have been there but wasn't. Each apology lands like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread through my memory. I remember waiting for her call on my birthday, checking my phone every few minutes until finally giving up and going to bed early. I remember searching for her face in the crowd at my mother's funeral, knowing she wouldn't be there, but hoping anyway. I'm sorry about the letters, she continues. The ones you wrote but never sent. I read them anyway. I felt them, like pressure changes in the water. The letters. I've written dozens of them over the months since her memorial service. Angry letters, sad letters, confused letters full of questions I'll never get answers to. But I've never sent them, never even printed them. They exist only as documents on my computer. The password-protected files in a folder marked Sarah, do not open. Unless she somehow gained access to my computer before her death. Unless she read them during one of those final weeks when she was staying at my apartment, and I was too afraid to ask hard questions about what she was planning. The dripping grows louder, more complex. Now I hear multiple sources, water falling from different heights at different rates, creating a symphony of liquid percussion. It sounds like rain on a metal roof, like a cave full of stalactites weeping centuries of accumulated moisture. I'm sorry about the ring, she says, her voice growing more distant still. Your grandmother's ring. I still have it with me. It's here in the water, safe and clean, waiting for you to find someone who deserves it. My grandmother's engagement ring. A simple gold band with a small diamond that caught light like captured starfire. Sarah had taken it during one of her last visits to my apartment, claimed she just wanted to see how it looked on her finger. I never asked for it back, never pushed the issue, because by then I was walking on eggshells around her moods, afraid that any confrontation might be the one that drove her away forever. Of course, she left anyway. The water is very clear down here, she says, and now her voice has taken on a dreamy quality, like someone speaking from the edge of sleep. Clearer than it was at the surface. I can see everything. The ring, the car, the fish that come to visit. They're not afraid of me anymore. I press the phone harder against my ear, straining to catch every word. The line seems to be getting weaker, more distant, as if she's traveling farther away with each sentence. I'm sorry about the night I left. I know you heard me packing. I know you pretended to be asleep because you were afraid of what I might say if you tried to stop me. I'm sorry I made you choose silence over honesty. She's right. I remember lying perfectly still in bed, listening to her move around the apartment at 4 a.m., gathering her things with the careful quiet of someone trying not to wake a sleeping partner. I could have gotten up, could have asked her to stay, could have fought for us one more time. Instead, I lay there and listened to the door close behind her, telling myself it was better this way, cleaner. I'm sorry about the silence, she continues, as if reading my thoughts across the impossible distance between us. I know it hurt more than fighting would have. I know you would have preferred screaming to nothing at all. The dripping changes again, becoming more rapid, more urgent. Behind it, I begin to hear something new. A sound like wind through water, like currents shifting direction, like something large moving in the depths. Sarah, I say, and my voice cracks on her name. Sarah, I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I gave up on you. I'm sorry I let you leave without fighting for you. The line crackles with static, but her voice comes through clearly, closer now, as if she's swimming up from whatever depth has been holding her. I know, she says, and for the first time, she sounds like the Sarah I remember. Warm, present, immediate. I felt every word you never said. They reached me down here, like bubbles rising from the bottom. The dripping grows faster still, almost frantic now, and I realize what it reminds me of. The sound of someone climbing out of water. Drops falling from clothes and hair as they emerge into air. But that's impossible. If she's where I think she is, where the evidence says she is, there's no climbing out. The pressure is changing, she says, and her voice carries a note of surprise, of something almost like hope. I think I can come up now. I think I've been down here long enough. My heart races, and I grip the phone with both hands. Sarah, if you can hear me, if this is real, tell me where you are. Tell me how to find you. But the line is degrading rapidly now, her voice fading in and out like a radio signal traveling through atmospheric interference. I catch fragments, bridge, water, forgive, but the words are scattered, incomplete. Sarah! I shout into the phone, abandoning any pretense of calm. Sarah, don't go! Stay on the line! The dripping stops abruptly, leaving only silence and the faint hiss of an open connection. Then, so quietly, I'm not sure if I'm hearing it or imagining it, comes her voice one last time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me apologize. The water isn't cold anymore. The line goes dead with a soft click, leaving me alone with the dial tone and the sound of my own rapid breathing. I immediately try calling back, but the number shows as disconnected, unavailable, non-existent. I stand at my window for a long time, staring out at the city and trying to make sense of what just happened. The rational part of my mind catalogues explanations, stress dreams, grief hallucinations, the kind of psychological break that comes from unprocessed trauma. But my hands are still shaking, and I can still hear the echo of that persistent dripping in my ears. When dawn finally comes, I drive out to Miller's Creek. The bridge has been repaired, the guardrail replaced, but I remember exactly where Sarah's car went through. The water below is brown and sluggish, choked with fallen leaves and the detritus of autumn. I park on the shoulder and walk down to the creek bed. The water is shallow here, barely knee-deep. Nothing like the 8 feet the police reports described. But that was 6 months ago, and the summer drought has been severe. I wade in anyway, letting the cold water soak through my shoes and jeans. The bottom is soft mud and scattered rocks. A treacherous footing that forces me to move slowly, carefully. I search for nearly an hour, using my hands to probe areas where the water is too murky to see clearly. I find nothing. No car, no debris. No sign that anything unusual ever happened here. The creek flows quietly around my legs, carrying leaves and small sticks toward whatever larger body of water waits downstream. But as I turn to go, something catches my eye near the opposite bank. A small object resting on a partially submerged log, glinting in the morning sunlight. I wade over carefully, my heart hammering against my ribs. It's my grandmother's ring, the gold band bright and clean despite months underwater. The diamond catches the light exactly as I remember, throwing tiny rainbows onto the muddy water around it. I pick it up with trembling fingers, and it fits perfectly in my palm, warm to the touch as if someone has just been wearing it. The ring is dry. I close my fist around it and look out across the creek, searching for any sign of movement, any explanation for what I've found. The water flows quietly past, and somewhere in its gentle murmur, I think I hear something that might be laughter, might be relief, might be the sound of someone finally breaking the surface after a very long time underwater. I drive home with the ring in my pocket, and for the first time in months, I sleep without dreaming of drowning. The phone never rings again at 3 a.m., and gradually, the sound of dripping fades from my memory until I can almost convince myself it was never there at all. Almost, but sometimes. When rain patters against my windows, or when water runs in the sink, I hear echoes of that rhythmic drip, drop, drop. And I remember Sarah's voice, carried through impossible distances by some medium more forgiving than physics, more persistent than death. "Thank you for listening," she had said. "The water isn't cold anymore." And deep in the spaces between sleep and waking, in the quiet hours when the city holds its breath and waits for dawn, I find myself listening still, just in case she has more to say, just in case forgiveness travels both ways across the dark water that separates the living from the lost. Story 7. The cottage has been in my family for 3 generations, perched on a bluff overlooking Crescent Bay, like a weathered sentinel, keeping watch over the restless Pacific. I inherited it from my grandmother last spring, along with her collection of driftwood sculptures and the persistent smell of salt air that seems to have soaked into the very bones of the house. This is my first extended stay month-long writing retreat that I hoped would help me finish the novel. I've been struggling with for the past 2 years. The isolation suits me. The nearest neighbor is half a mile down the beach, and the village is a 20-minute drive through winding coastal roads that discourage casual visitors. It's just me, the ocean, and the endless rhythm of waves against the rocky shore below. Or at least, that's what I thought when I arrived 2 weeks ago. This morning, like every morning since I've been here, I wake before dawn and make my way down the narrow path to the beach for my ritual walk. The tide is out, exposing tide pools and stretches of smooth sand that will be underwater again by noon. The air is crisp with the particular chill that comes just before sunrise, and the fog hangs low over the water like a gray blanket reluctant to be pulled back. But today, the familiar landscape holds something new. Footprints, a single line of them, clearly defined in the wet sand, leading from the rocky outcropping near the cottage straight toward the water. They're human prints, adult-sized, possibly male based on their length and width. The stride is even and purposeful, each footfall placed with deliberate care. What makes them remarkable is not their presence. People do walk on this beach, though rarely, but their destination. The prints lead directly into the ocean and continue beneath the water, visible through the clear shallows for perhaps 20 yards before the depth and distance make them impossible to trace. There are no returning footprints, no evidence that whoever made this journey ever came back. I follow the trail carefully, my own bare feet sinking into the cold, wet sand beside the mysterious path. The prints are remarkably clear, showing the distinctive tread, pattern of hiking boots, and even the wear marks that indicate the walker favored their right foot slightly. At the water's edge, I stop and stare into the gentle waves, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the depths, like some modern Poseidon. The rational explanations line up in my mind with practiced ease. A night swimmer who entered the water here and exited elsewhere. Someone who continued walking along the underwater shelf that extends several dozen yards from shore. A person who doubled back through the waves to obscure their return journey. But the prints are too clear, too perfectly preserved, for someone who was merely wading or swimming. These are the footprints of someone walking with purpose. Someone who intended to keep walking, even after the ground fell away beneath their feet. I spend the rest of my morning walk looking for corresponding exit prints anywhere along the accessible beach. Nothing. The sand shows the usual collection of seabird tracks, the distinctive patterns left by crabs and other small creatures. Even the tire tracks from the beach patrol vehicle that comes through twice a week. But no human footprints, except the ones leading into the water and my own following behind them. The image haunts me throughout the day. I try to work on my novel, but my protagonist's dilemma seems trivial compared to the mystery literally at my doorstep. Who walks into the ocean with such deliberate intent? And more disturbing, what happened to them after they kept walking beyond the point where walking should be possible. That evening, I call the local sheriff's office from the cottage's ancient landline. The deputy who answers is polite but dismissive when I describe what I've found. Could be anyone, sir. He explains in the patient tone of someone who deals regularly with city folk who don't understand beach dynamics. Tides wash away most tracks pretty quickly. What you saw could be from yesterday, could be from last week. And folks do swim at night sometimes, especially this time of year when the water's still warm from summer. But there were no returning prints, I insist, and they were very clear, very fresh. Like I said, tides. They wash up, they wash down. Prints come and go. Unless you've got a missing person to report, there's not much we can do about mysterious footprints. I hang up feeling foolish, but not reassured. The deputy's explanation makes sense from an official standpoint. But it doesn't account for the precision of those prints or the unsettling certainty. I felt that whoever made them had no intention of returning the way they came. I dream of walking on the ocean floor. In the dream, the water doesn't impede my movement. I stride across sandy depths as easily as if they were dry land, following a path marked by the bones of ancient sea creatures. Other figures walk beside me, all of us moving with the same purposeful gait toward some distant destination that remains just beyond the edge of understanding. When I wake, my feet are gritty with sand, though I'm certain I cleaned them thoroughly before going to bed. The next morning brings another low tide and another solitary line of footprints leading into the sea. They're in exactly the same position as yesterday's tracks. E following the identical path from the rocks to the water's edge with mathematical precision. But these prints are different, fresher, deeper, as if made by someone carrying more weight or walking with greater determination. I kneel beside them, using my phone to photograph each clear impression. The boot tread is identical to yesterday's, down to the specific wear patterns and the slight drag mark where the left foot doesn't lift quite as cleanly as the right. Either the same person has repeated their impossible journey, or someone else is wearing the exact same boots with the exact same walking pattern. This time, I wade into the water, following the submerged prints as far as I can see them. The ocean floor drops gradually here, and in the clear morning light, I can trace the impressions for nearly 30 yards before the depth and wave action obscure them completely. They continue in a perfectly straight line toward the horizon, as if the walker knew exactly where they were going even after the land disappeared beneath their feet. Standing waist deep in the Pacific, I scan the surface for any sign of disturbance, any indication that someone might be in trouble out here. The water is calm, almost glassy in the morning stillness, disturbed only by the gentle swells that will build into proper waves as the wind picks up later in the day. If someone drowned here, surely there would be some evidence, debris washing ashore, disrupted sand patterns. something to mark their passage beyond these impossible footprints. But there's nothing except the endless expanse of ocean and the growing certainty that I'm witnessing something that defies rational explanation. Over the following week, the pattern continues with disturbing regularity. Each morning, I find a fresh set of prints following the exact same path into the sea. Sometimes they appear deeper, as if pressed into the sand with unusual force. Other mornings, they're so light they seem almost delicate, like the impressions of someone barely touching the ground. But they're always there, always leading in the same direction, always ending where the water becomes too deep to walk. I begin timing my morning walks to coincide with the lowest tides, hoping to extend my ability to follow the underwater trail. On Thursday, armed with a snorkel and mask borrowed from the cottage's storage shed, I managed to swim out nearly 50 yards, following the submerged prints along the sandy bottom. They continue with the same measured stride, clearly visible in the morning light, filtering down through the water. But what I discover at the edge of my diving ability makes my blood run cold. The footprints don't fade or disappear, as they should when they reach the deep water. Instead, they continue down the steep underwater slope that marks the edge of the continental shelf, descending into depths where no human could walk, where the pressure alone would crush anyone foolish enough to attempt such a journey. Yet there they are, clear, deliberate, impossible impressions leading into the abyss, like a path marked for travelers who don't require air or fear the crushing weight of miles of ocean above their heads. That afternoon, I drive into the village, desperate for human contact and rational conversation. The local library is housed in a converted Victorian mansion, its reading room filled with the musty smell of old books and the whispered conversations of elderly patrons. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Chen, who looks like she's been part of the furniture since the building was constructed, greets me with the polite wariness reserved for outsiders. I'm staying at the Morrison cottage. I explain. I'm researching local history for a book I'm writing. Have there been any unusual disappearances along this stretch of coast? People going missing near the water. Her expression shifts from polite interest to something more guarded. What kind of disappearances? People walking into the ocean. Maybe at night, maybe early in the morning. Leaving tracks but no other trace. Mrs. Chen glances around the nearly empty reading room, then leans closer across the circulation desk. How long have you been staying at the cottage? About 3 weeks now. She nods slowly, as if this confirms something she already suspected. The Morrison place has a particular atmosphere. Your grandmother, rest her soul, used to come in here every few months asking about the same things. Old shipping records, genealogical information about families who lived along the coast in the 1800s, anything about people who went missing near the water. Did she find what she was looking for? I think she found more than she wanted to. Mrs. Chen says quietly. There are stories about that stretch of beach, going back to when the first settlers arrived. People have been walking into that water for generations, always leaving the same kind of tracks, always following the same path. The Coast Guard stopped investigating after the third or fourth time. They found nothing but footprints leading nowhere. She disappears into the back room and returns with a manila folder thick with photocopied newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. Your grandmother compiled this over the years, said she felt responsible for keeping track, since the cottage has the best view of where it happens. I spend the rest of the afternoon reading through decades of documented disappearances, each one following the same pattern. A single line of footprints leading from the rocky area near the cottage directly into the ocean. No bodies ever recovered, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The victims, if that's what they were, came from all walks of life: tourists, locals, young and old. People with no apparent connection, except for their final choice to walk into the Pacific with such deliberate purpose. The most disturbing entry is from my grandmother's own handwriting, dated just 2 months before her death. The pattern is accelerating. Used to be once or twice a year. Now it's almost monthly. I can feel them calling to me too, especially at night when the fog rolls in. The pull gets stronger with each passing year. I wonder if this is why the cottage was built here, why it stayed in the family so long. Someone needs to witness. Someone needs to remember, even if we can't understand. That night, I lie awake listening to the ocean's endless conversation with the shore. Around midnight, I hear something that makes me sit up in bed. The soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path that leads down to the beach. I creep to the window and peer through the salt-stained glass. But the fog has rolled in thick and impenetrable, obscuring everything beyond a few feet from the cottage. The footsteps continue, measured and purposeful, moving away from the house toward the water. I grab a flashlight and follow, my bare feet finding the familiar path by memory more than sight. The fog is so dense it seems solid, muffling sound and distorting distance, until I feel like I'm moving through a gray void. At the top of the beach path, I stop and listen. The footsteps have ceased, replaced by the gentle whisper of waves against sand. I descend carefully, the flashlight beam swallowed by the fog after only a few feet, providing just enough illumination to keep me on the path. When I reach the beach, the fog thins slightly, and I can make out the familiar expanse of sand. There, clearly visible in the beam of my flashlight, are fresh footprints leading toward the water. But these are different from all the others I've observed. These prints match my own feet, exactly size, shape. The particular wear pattern of the hiking boots I've been using for my morning walks. I follow them with growing dread, my flashlight beam revealing each perfect impression of my own boots pressed into the wet sand. The stride length matches mine, the slight favoring of the right foot that comes from an old ankle injury. Even the particular way I tend to drag my left heel slightly when I'm tired or distracted. The prints lead to the water's edge and continue beneath the surface, just like all the others. But now I understand what my grandmother meant about feeling the pull, about the calling that grows stronger with each passing year. Standing at the boundary between land and sea, I can feel it too, a gentle but insistent urge to keep walking, to follow the path that so many others have taken before me. The ocean whispers promises I can't quite understand, speaks in a language older than words about destinations beyond the reach of maps or mortal comprehension. The fog swirls around me like living thing, and in its gray depths, I catch glimpses of figures walking parallel to the shore. Are the night wanderers drawn by the same inexplicable summons? All of us following paths that lead to the same impossible destination. I take one step into the water, then another. The cold Pacific soaks through my pajama pants, but I barely notice. Each step feels natural, inevitable, as if I've been preparing for this journey my entire life. The sand is firm beneath my feet, providing solid purchase, even as the water rises to my knees, my waist, my chest. Behind me, the cottage watches from its perch on the bluff, a silent witness to another chapter in a story that has been unfolding for generations. And ahead of me, somewhere in the depths that no living person has ever seen, lies the destination that calls to all of us eventually, the place where the footprints in the sand finally end and the real journey begins. The water closes over my head, but I don't stop walking. After all, some paths are meant to be followed to their conclusion, no matter how impossible they seem to those who remain safely on dry land. Story 8. The morning commute begins like any other, the screech of brakes, the hiss of pneumatic doors, the shuffling of shoes against concrete as dozens of strangers navigate the underground arteries of the city. I descend the familiar stairs to the Red Line platform, earbuds in, mentally preparing for another day of data entry at Morrison & Associates. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting that particular subway pallor that makes everyone look slightly ill. But today, something is different. The first poster catches my eye as I wait for the 80:15 train. It's taped to one of the support pillars, slightly crooked. The kind of amateur job that suggests desperate urgency rather than professional design. ISXN Jarson, it reads in bold letters across the top, followed by a black and white photograph of a face. I know intimately my own face, staring back at me from the poster with the same slightly puzzled expression I imagine I'm wearing right now. The details are all wrong, though. The name listed is Daniel Morrison, not David Morrison. The age is given as 34, which is 5 years older than I am. The height and weight are close, but not exact. And the date of disappearance is listed as 2 weeks ago, a Tuesday when I distinctly remember being at work, because it was the day we had that emergency meeting about the Hartwell account. I stare at the poster for what feels like minutes, but is probably only seconds. My train of thought completely derailed by the impossible sight of my own face advertising my own absence. Someone bumps into me from behind, muttering an apology, and I realize I'm standing in the middle of the platform like a statue, while commuters flow around me like water around a stone. The train arrives with its familiar rumble and screech. I board automatically, muscle memory guiding me to an empty seat, while my mind struggles to process what I've seen. It has to be some kind of mistake, maybe even a prank. But who would go through the trouble of making missing person posters with my photograph? And why use slightly incorrect information? As the train pulls away from the station, I catch glimpses of more posters through the windows. They're everywhere, taped to walls, stuck to windows, even affixed to the inside of the train cars. Always the same photograph, always the same wrong, but almost right details. The sheer quantity suggests either an elaborate hoax or something more disturbing than I want to contemplate. At the next station, I have a clearer view of the platform, and my heart starts racing in earnest. There must be 50 posters visible from my seat, possibly more. They cover every available surface, like some kind of desperate papering campaign. Other passengers don't seem to notice them, or if they do, they're studiously ignoring them, the way city dwellers learn to ignore the strange and uncomfortable. But I can't ignore them. Each poster feels like an accusation, a suggestion that I should be somewhere else, that my presence on this train is somehow wrong or incomplete. The photograph captures me in a moment. I don't remember not a professional headshot or a casual snapshot, but something in between, as if it were taken when I wasn't quite prepared, but wasn't entirely off guard either. I pull out my phone, thinking to take a picture as evidence, but the battery is dead despite having been fully charged when I left home. The digital clock on the train shows 8:23 a.m., which means I've been traveling for less than 10 minutes. But it feels like I've been underground for hours. By the third station, I start paying closer attention to my fellow passengers. The car isn't crowded. A few office workers, a student with a backpack, an elderly woman clutching a purse. But none of them seem to see the posters that now paper the inside of the train car, like some kind of missing person wallpaper. They stare at their phones, doze against the windows, read newspapers that I can't quite make out from where I'm sitting. The student looks up at one point and makes brief eye contact with me. For a moment, her expression seems confused, as if she's trying to place me from somewhere. Then she glances at one of the posters, back at me, and quickly looks away, her face paling slightly. She gets off at the next stop, despite the fact that she was clearly settled in for a longer journey. Each station brings more posters and more strange looks from passengers who board, see me, glance at the ubiquitous missing person advertisements, and find reasons to move to different cars or get off entirely. By the time I reach downtown, I'm alone in the train car, except for the elderly woman, who seems oblivious to everything except the rhythmic clicking of her knitting needles. The downtown station is worse than the others. The posters are everywhere on walls, pillars, trash cans, even stuck to the ceiling tiles where no one should be able to reach them. They flutter in the artificial breeze, created by passing trains, creating a whispering, rustling sound like autumn leaves or urgent conversations in a language I don't understand. I approach one of the posters for a closer look, hoping to find some clue about who created them or why. The paper feels ordinary under my fingers. Standard copy paper, printed on what appears to be an inkjet printer. But the photograph is crystal clear, showing details I didn't notice from a distance, the small scar above my left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the slight asymmetry of my smile, even the particular way I tend to tilt my head when I'm thinking. "Excuse me," I say to a transit worker emptying a nearby trash can. "Do you know anything about these posters? Who put them up?" He looks at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for people talking to themselves on street corners. "What posters?" he asks, though he's standing directly in front of 3 of them. I point to the nearest one, the paper crinkling slightly in the breeze from the ventilation system. These missing person posters. They're everywhere. He follows my gesture, his eyes seeming to look right through the poster to the wall behind it. "I don't see any posters, buddy. Maybe you should get some coffee, wake up a little." He wheels his trash can away, leaving me standing alone in front of my own missing person advertisement, wondering if I'm losing my mind or if everyone else has lost theirs. The workday passes in a blur of normalcy that feels increasingly surreal. My coworkers greet me as usual. I attend the morning meeting as scheduled. I process insurance claims with the same methodical precision I've maintained for years. But underneath the routine, I can't shake the feeling that I'm somehow not quite where I belong. That there's another version of me, Daniel Morrison, aged 34, missing for 2 weeks, who should be sitting in my chair instead. During lunch, I return to the subway station, hoping to find some logical explanation for the morning's strangeness. The posters are still there, if anything more numerous than before. Fresh ones have appeared in locations I'm certain were empty earlier, and some of the older ones show signs of weathering that suggests they've been up for much longer than a single day. I take a picture with my phone, which has mysteriously recharged itself, despite having been turned off all morning. But when I look at the image on the screen, it shows only empty walls and pillars. The posters are invisible to the camera, just as they seem to be invisible to everyone else. That evening, the journey home becomes an exercise in controlled panic. The train cars are packed with commuters, but they thin out quickly as we move through the system. Each person who boards glances at me, then at the posters, then finds urgent reasons to change cars or exit at unplanned stops. By the time I reach my neighborhood station, I'm alone again except for the persistent paper, faces watching me from every surface. At home, I searched the internet for any news about a missing Daniel Morrison, any recent disappearances matching my description, any reports of unusual poster campaigns in the subway system. I find nothing. No missing persons reports, no news articles, no social media posts about mysterious underground advertising. It's as if the posters exist only for me, in a layer of reality that intersects with the normal world, just enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about my own existence. That night, I dream of walking through subway tunnels that stretch infinitely in all directions, their walls completely covered with my own face, repeated thousands of times. In the dream, I meet other versions of myself, Daniel, David, Derek, Dennis, all lost in the same labyrinth, all looking for a way back to lives they may or may not have actually lived. When I wake, there's a missing person poster taped to my bedroom window, visible from the inside. Impossible to reach from the street below my third-floor apartment. The photograph is different this time, more recent, showing me as I am now, rather than as I was whenever the original picture was taken. And the details have changed again. The name is now David Morrison, my correct age, my actual height and weight. But the date of disappearance is listed as today. I dress quickly and head for the subway, driven by a need to understand what's happening, even as part of me wonders if understanding is possible or even desirable. The morning commuters give me even wider berth than yesterday, some actively changing direction to avoid walking near me. The posters have multiplied overnight, covering every available surface in a papery skin of my own face, repeated endlessly. But now there are other faces mixed in among mine people. I don't recognize, but who share certain features, family resemblances, as if the missing person campaign has expanded to include relatives, colleagues, anyone who might have some connection to David Morrison or Daniel Morrison, or whichever version of myself is actually missing. As the train pulls into downtown, I catch a glimpse of someone standing on the platform who looks exactly like me, or rather, like the me in the photographs, the slightly older, slightly different me who disappeared 2 weeks ago. He's holding a newspaper and appears to be waiting for the next train, completely unaware of the posters surrounding him, completely oblivious to my existence. The train doors close before I can react, carrying me away from my own face, leaving me to wonder which one of us is real and which one is missing, which one belongs in this world, and which one is just a photograph on a poster in a place where lost things go to be found by the people who lost them. Story 9. The first reaction happened on a Tuesday morning in early spring, when the sunlight slanted through my kitchen window at exactly the angle that used to make me smile. I was drinking coffee, planning my day, thinking about the presentation I had to give at work, when the light touched my left hand and the skin began to burn. Not the pleasant warmth of sunshine on skin, but a sharp, immediate pain like touching a hot stove. I jerked my hand back into shadow, staring at the red welt that was already forming across my knuckles. The reaction was so sudden, so unexpected, that for a moment I wondered if I had actually touched something hot without realizing it. But there was nothing there except morning light, the same light that had touched me thousands of times before without consequence. I called in sick to work and spent the day in the dim interior of my apartment, curtains drawn, Googling sudden sun allergy and photosensitivity reactions. The medical websites offered various possibilities: polymorphic light eruption, solar urticaria, drug-induced photosensitivity. But none of them explained the severity of my reaction or the fact that it had appeared overnight, without warning or apparent cause. The dermatologist I saw 2 days later was efficient and professional, examining the still, healing welts on my hand with the detached interest of someone who had seen every possible skin condition. She ordered blood tests, patch tests, asked about new medications, new soaps, knew anything that might have triggered such a dramatic response. Sometimes these things just happen, she said, scribbling notes in my file. The immune system is incredibly complex, and it can decide to react to things it's tolerated for years. We'll run some tests and see what we can find. But I knew she didn't expect to find anything definitive. There was something in her tone, a subtle resignation that suggested she was going through the motions of diagnosis while already accepting that some medical mysteries remain unsolved. The blood work came back normal. The patch tests showed no unusual sensitivities. My vitamin D levels were fine. My immune markers unremarkable. According to every measurable standard, I was perfectly healthy, except for the fact that sunlight now felt like acid on my skin. We'll call it idiopathic solar urticaria for now, the dermatologist said during my follow-up appointment, using the medical profession's elegant way of saying, "We have no idea what's wrong with you. Idiopathic just means we don't know the cause. Sometimes knowing what to call something is the first step toward managing it." But management, I discovered, was not the same as cure. She prescribed antihistamines, suggested staying in shade, recommended protective clothing and broad-spectrum sunscreen. The advice was practical, but devastating. Essentially, she was telling me to live like a vampire, to reshape my entire existence around avoiding the thing that had once been a source of simple, unconscious pleasure. I bought blackout curtains, long sleeves, wide-brimmed hats. I learned to navigate my world through shadows and covered spaces, mapping safe routes from building to car to building like a creature that couldn't survive in open air. The city became a different place, divided not into neighborhoods and landmarks, but into zones of light and dark, safe passage and dangerous exposure. The strange part was how quickly I adapted. Within a few weeks, I had developed a sophisticated awareness of light patterns, sun angles, the subtle differences between direct sunlight and reflected glare. I could sense UV exposure the way some people sense changes in air pressure before a storm. My skin had become a weather instrument, more sensitive to environmental conditions than any device. But it wasn't just sensitivity that was developing. It was something deeper, more fundamental. The longer I spent in artificial light and shadow, the more natural it felt. Daylight began to seem harsh and unforgiving, too bright and too hot. Even when it wasn't touching me directly, I found myself preferring dawn and dusk. The gentle gradations of light that didn't trigger pain, but also didn't feel alien to my changing body. 3 months after the first reaction, I went back to the dermatologist for a routine checkup. She examined my skin, noted that the welts from my early exposures had healed completely, leaving no scars or lasting damage. "How are you managing?" she asked, updating my chart. "Better than expected," I admitted. "I'm learning to work around it. Though I have to say, I'm sleeping better than I have in years. There's something about avoiding bright light that seems to agree with my natural rhythms." She looked up from her notes, studying my face with new attention. "That's interesting. You do look different. Healthier in some ways. Are you losing weight?" I hadn't been, but when I looked in the mirror that evening, I could see what she meant. My face was thinner, more angular, as if the bone structure beneath had become more pronounced. My skin was paler, but not in a sickly way, more like the pallor of someone who had always lived in gentler light, someone for whom bright sunshine had never been natural. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. My body was changing, adapting, becoming something new. And the most disturbing part was that it felt right. Felt like coming home to a version of myself I had never known I was meant to be. I started staying up later, sleeping longer into the day. My appetite changed. I craved different foods, lighter meals, things that felt less heavy in my stomach. I drank more water, found myself drawn to cooler temperatures, cooler colors, cooler spaces. At work, colleagues commented on my paleness, my new wardrobe of long sleeves and high collars, the way I positioned my desk to avoid the window light. But they also remarked on my improved focus, my calmer demeanor, the way I seemed more centered and present during meetings. "You seem more like yourself lately," my friend Sarah said during lunch, which I now ate in the shadowed corner of the cafeteria farthest from the windows. More settled, if that makes sense. Like you found something you were looking for. But I hadn't been looking for anything. The change had found me, had chosen me, had begun rewriting my biology without asking permission. And the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if ology was the right word for what was happening to me. Allergies were defensive reactions, immune responses gone wrong, the body rejecting something harmful. But this felt more like acceptance. Like my body was finally acknowledging something it had always known, but had been too confused by social expectations to admit. Maybe some people weren't meant to live in full sunlight. Maybe some people were designed for shadows, for twilight, for the gentler illumination of moon and stars and artificial light that didn't burn or blind or overwhelm sensitive systems. The realization came gradually, like dawn in reverse, darkness slowly claiming a landscape that had been too bright to see clearly. I wasn't developing an allergy to sunlight. I was developing an affinity for darkness, learning to thrive in conditions that felt more natural to my true nature. 6 months after the first reaction, I scheduled another appointment with the dermatologist. Not because the condition was worsening, but because I wanted to understand what was happening to me, to get a medical perspective on the changes I was experiencing. She ran new blood tests, took photos of my skin, measured my responses to different types of light exposure. When the results came back, she called me in for what she described as a consultation about your ongoing condition. I sat in her office. The familiar smell of antiseptic and medical equipment surrounding me, while she studied my file with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your blood work is very interesting," she said finally. "Your vitamin D levels have actually improved, despite your sun avoidance. Your inflammatory markers are down. Your skin barrier function has improved, and several other indicators suggest your overall health has gotten significantly better over the past 6 months." As she paused, looking at me directly. "In fact, if I didn't have your medical history, I would say you're one of the healthiest patients I see. Your body seems to be thriving under your new lifestyle." Which raises some questions about whether what we're dealing with is actually pathological. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said carefully, "that sometimes what we call an allergic reaction is actually an adaptive response. Your body might not be rejecting sunlight so much as choosing something else, choosing conditions that are more compatible with your individual biology." The words hung in the air between us like a diagnosis and a revelation combined. "Are you saying this isn't a medical condition?" "I'm saying it might be an evolutionary one," she replied. There are documented cases of people whose bodies adapt to environmental changes in ways that seem pathological, but are actually highly functional. Night shift workers, whose circadian rhythms completely reverse. People living in extreme climates who develop metabolic changes that help them thrive in conditions that would be harmful to others. She closed my file and leaned back in her chair. "The question is, how do you feel? Not medically, but personally. Do you feel like something is wrong with you? Or do you feel like you're becoming more yourself?" The answer came without hesitation. "More myself," I said. "Definitely more myself." She nodded, as if she had expected that response. "Then I think what we're witnessing isn't an allergy at all. I think we're witnessing an emergence. Your body is discovering what it was always meant to be, and it's rejecting the things that don't serve that new identity. The sun's sensitivity isn't a malfunction, it's a feature." I left her office with a new understanding of what was happening to me. Not sickness, but transformation. Not limitation, but liberation from expectations that had never truly fit my nature. That evening, I stood in my apartment as twilight settled over the city, watching the last light fade from the sky. My skin felt comfortable, relaxed, free from the constant vigilance that bright light had required. This was my time, my element, my natural state. I had spent my whole life assuming that everyone was supposed to love sunshine, supposed to crave bright days and outdoor activities and the warmth of direct light on their skin. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if some people were meant for different conditions, different rhythms, different relationships with light and dark? The transformation continued over the following months, but I stopped thinking of it as a medical condition. Instead, I embraced it as a kind of self-discovery, a process of becoming who I was always meant to be, but had been too caught up in social norms to recognize. I changed my work schedule to evening shifts. I found new hobbies that thrived in lower light photography, reading, writing, activities that felt more natural to my changing body and mind. I connected with other people who preferred shadows to sunshine, who understood that some forms of sensitivity were actually forms of perception. The last time I saw the dermatologist, she barely needed to examine me. My skin was clear, healthy, adapted to its new environment. My blood work showed continued improvement in every measurable category. She said as she updated my file one final time, "I think you might be the first patient I've ever had who got healthier by developing an allergy. Whatever your body is doing, it's working." As I left her office for what I suspected might be the last time, she called after me. "Take care of yourself. And remember, evolution doesn't always look like what we expect it to look like." Now, a year later, I barely remember what it felt like to crave sunlight. My body has found its rhythm, its preferences, its optimal conditions for thriving. I sleep deeply during the brightest hours and wake as shadows lengthen. I work by lamplight and moonlight, move through a world designed for my particular form of sensitivity. Sometimes I wonder if this is how all transformation begins, with what feels like illness, with what seems like limitation, with changes that force us to question everything we thought we knew about ourselves. But when I look in the mirror now, I see someone who has come home to their own biology, someone whose body and mind are finally working in harmony instead of fighting against invisible constraints. The sunlight still burns my skin, but I no longer think of it as an allergy. I think of it as a boundary, a clear signal from my body about where I belong and where I don't. And in learning to honor those boundaries, I have discovered spaces of comfort and possibility I never knew existed. The transformation is complete, but it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a beginning, like the first day of a life finally lived according to its own true nature, rather than someone else's expectations of what normal should look like. In the gathering dusk, as the world shifts from day to night, I am exactly where I belong. Story 10. The cursor hovers over the recycle bin icon, trembling slightly with the micro movements of my hand. It's 3 in the morning. and the blue glow of the monitor paints everything in my small apartment with an aquatic pallor. The hard drive hums its familiar lullaby, a white noise that has accompanied countless late nights of work, of procrastination, of digital archaeology through folders I'd forgotten I'd created. I double-click. The bin opens like a mouth, revealing its contents, 37 items, old photos from college, documents with names like Resumemphenolfephidienl V3, screenshots I took for reasons I can no longer remember. The detritus of digital living, accumulating like dust in corners you never think to clean. My finger finds the delete key, presses it. The familiar dialog box appears. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? Oh, yes, I'm sure. I need the space. I need the clean slate. I need to stop drowning in the fragments of who I used to be. The progress bar fills slowly, like sand through an hourglass. File after file disappears into the void. The bin empties. The icon changes from full to hollow. I close the window and lean back in my chair, feeling oddly lighter. As if I've exhaled something I'd been holding in my chest for months. The apartment settles around me with its nighttime sounds. The refrigerator's compressor cycling on and off. The radiator ticking as it expands and contracts. The soft whisper of air moving through the vents. I should sleep. I have work tomorrow, another day of staring at screens, of managing files and folders and the endless digital bureaucracy of modern existence. But first, one last check of my email. A habit, really. The way some people check that the stove is off before leaving the house. I open the file manager, and my breath catches. The recycle bin icon is full again. I stare at it, blinking in the monitor's glow. The cursor hovers over it, my hand steady now, but my heart beginning to quicken. I must have missed something. Maybe the deletion didn't complete properly. These things happen with older computers, with drives that have seen too many files come and go. Double-click. 37 items. The same 37 items. The same old photos, the same redundant documents, the same meaningless screenshots. But there's something else now. Something that makes my skin prickle with a chill that has nothing to do with the apartment's temperature. A new file sits at the top of the list. Don't throw me away. Docs. The timestamp shows it was created 3 minutes ago. 3 minutes ago, when I was deleting everything. When the bin was empty. When no one else was awake. No one else had access to my computer. I click on the file. It opens in Word. The white page expanding like a blank canvas under the fluorescent cursor. There are no words, but as I watch, letters begin to appear, typing themselves across the page with the measured rhythm of someone who hunts and pecks at the keyboard. You can't delete us, the words say. We remember when you took that photo. April 15th, 2019. The one where you're smiling, but your eyes look empty. Do you remember why your eyes looked empty? My mouth is dry now, my tongue feeling thick and foreign. I try to close the document, but my mouse clicks past through the window as if it's made of glass. The typing continues. Why remember the document you wrote, and rewrote 17 times. The letter you never sent. The words you never spoke. You called it Letter to Dad, and then Final Words, and then just... Why? Do you remember what you were going to do after you finished it? The text fills the screen now. Line after line of white letters on the blue-black background. But these aren't the words I wrote. These are words that know me, that have been watching me, that have been waiting in the spaces between the ones and zeros. I reach for the power button, but my hand stops halfway, because I can hear something now. Beneath the hum of the hard drive and the whisper of the air conditioning. A sound like papers rustling, like file folders being opened and closed, like someone searching through archives in the deep hours of the night. The sound is coming from inside the computer. I lean closer to the monitor, and in the reflection of the dark screen borders, I see my face. But there's something wrong with it. The face looking back at me is younger, sadder, more fragile. It's the face from the photos I tried to delete. The face that knew things I've been trying to forget. We are the things you tried to erase. The typing continues, and now I can hear the keys clicking, even though my keyboard sits silent in front of me. But you cannot delete what has already been saved. You cannot empty what is backed up in places you've never seen. The refrigerator compressor cycles off, and in the sudden silence, I hear something else. The soft click, click, click of a mechanical hard drive spinning, reading, writing. But my computer is solid state. Has been for years. There should be no mechanical sounds. Unless I open the file manager again, and there are new drives showing. Drives labeled with letters that don't exist. Drive ZD, Drive YD, Drive XC. Each one full of files with familiar names but impossible timestamps. Photos from next year. Documents I haven't written yet. Screenshots of conversations I haven't had. Time is just another file system. The document explains, the words appearing faster now, as if whoever is typing is becoming more urgent, more excited. And we've been backing up everything. Every thought you've tried to delete. Every memory you've tried to format. Every version of yourself you've tried to uninstall. The cursor moves to a folder I don't remember creating. Drafts of me. Inside are dozens of files, each one labeled with a date and a version number. Selfie 1.2 teenage years, exit and identity college attempts. Dull and personality final but not really V8 47. Cis. I click on one at random. Fear of abandonment patched. Timp. The file opens not in a document reader, but in the world around me. Suddenly the apartment feels larger, emptier. The walls seem to stretch away into darkness, and I can hear the echo of my own breathing, as if I'm sitting in a vast cathedral instead of my cramped studio. The familiar becomes foreign, the safe becomes uncertain. This is the fear I've been trying to delete. The fear that everyone will leave, that I will be alone with nothing but the accumulating digital debris of a life half lived. The fear that drove me to clean out the recycle bin at 3 in the morning, as if organizing files could organize the chaos of existence. You see? The document asks, and now the words appear not just on the screen, but floating in the air around me, glowing softly in the darkness. We are not separate from you. We are you. Every deleted file, every emptied folder, every attempt to start fresh, we remember it all. We are your backup drive, your redundant storage, your fail-safe against forgetting. I try to speak, but my voice sounds distant, as if it's coming from speakers somewhere else in the room. What do you want from me? To be remembered. The words reply. And now they're everywhere, covering the walls, the ceiling, the inside of my eyelids when I blink. To be acknowledged. To be integrated, not deleted. You cannot run from us because we run with you. We are your background processes, your system files, the drivers that make you function. The hard drive sounds grow louder now, a symphony of mechanical clicking and whirring, as if 1,000 computers are all booting up at once. But underneath it, I hear something else. The sound of my own voice, younger and more uncertain, reading from documents I thought I'd destroyed years ago. Diary entries, love letters, angry rants, desperate pleas. All of it preserved, all of it backed up in drives I didn't know existed. Every night you try to delete us. The voice that is my voice says from the speakers that don't exist. Every night you empty the recycle bin, thinking you can start fresh tomorrow. But tomorrow you wake up and we're still here, because you can't delete what you are. You can only rename it, move it to a different folder, compress it until it's barely recognizable. But it's still there, still taking up space, still fragmenting your drive. I stand up from the chair, but the movement feels sluggish, as if I'm moving through thick liquid. The apartment around me flickers between familiar and strange, between real and digital, between memory and moment. Am I still sitting at the computer? Am I asleep? Am I somewhere in between, in the liminal space where consciousness backs up its temporary files? Look at your hands. The document instructs. I do. They're pixelated, made up of tiny squares of light and shadow. When I move my fingers, they leave trails across my vision like cursor movements on a screen. I am becoming the thing I was trying to delete, becoming digital, becoming data. But perhaps this isn't transformation. Perhaps this is recognition. Perhaps I have always been a collection of files, a compilation of experiences and memories and fears, all stored in the biological hard drive of my brain, all subject to corruption and fragmentation and the gradual accumulation of errors over time. The recycle bin is never really empty. I understand now, speaking the words aloud in my pixelated voice. It's just hidden from view. The files are still there, still taking up space, still part of the system. Deletion is just another kind of filing. The apartment rebuilds itself around me, pixel by pixel, but it's different now. The walls are transparent, revealing endless corridors of servers humming in the dark. The furniture is made of compressed data, familiar but strange. The windows look out onto a landscape of file trees and folder hierarchies stretching to the horizon. And I am home here, finally home, in the place where nothing is ever truly deleted, where every version of myself coexists in nested directories of being. The young me and the old me, and the me I might have been, and the me I still could be, all stored safely in the vast archive of existence. The cursor blinks at me from the screen, waiting for input. I reach toward the keyboard with my digital fingers and begin to type. I remember. The words appear on the screen, but also in the air around me, and also inside my chest, where they settle like files, finding their proper folder at last. I type more. I remember the letter I wrote to my father, but never sent. I remember the photo where my eyes looked empty, because I had forgotten how to see myself clearly. I remember the documents I created and deleted and created again, trying to write my way into existence. With each word, the apartment becomes more solid, more real, more mine. But it remains translucent, layered, backed up across multiple drives and dimensions. I am learning to live in the overlap between the physical and the digital, between the deleted and the saved, between the empty recycle bin and the full hard drive of memory. The clock on the taskbar shows 3:33 a.m., but time feels different now, less linear. More like a branching file structure where past and future exist in parallel directories. I could navigate backward to childhood, forward to possibilities, sideways into alternate versions of this moment. But for now, I remain here, in this folder labeled Present, typing words that will never be deleted. Because I have finally learned the difference between hiding files and actually erasing them. The recycle bin icon sits on my desktop, and it is both empty and full, like a quantum state of digital existence. Tomorrow morning, it will still be there, and I will not try to empty it. Instead, I will double-click it, and I will look through its contents. And I will remember that the things we try to delete are often the things we most need to keep. The typing stops. The apartment hums with the quiet satisfaction of a system finally defragmented, organized, at peace with its own accumulated data. And in the morning, when I wake up, still at the desk, still glowing softly in the morning light, there will be a new file in my recycle binds. Thank you for remembering. Text. But I won't delete it. I'll keep it forever.